These were the enemies of all mankind, surrounded by monstrous magical power, strange monsters appearing as if from nowhere, which sometimes became an entire army, threatening the whole world. They focused on humanity, devastating, eliminating, and cutting it out. Because they came from dark abandoned lands, people filled with fear called them demons. Having entered the School of Knights and graduated from it, remaining in first place until the very end, later, his skills were appreciated, and he became the youngest person in history to receive the status of a sage. Then he was included in the Order of Knights. He, Keith Brandon, the youngest sage in history, and also, already in the past, a member of the 11th Knightly Order, was asked how it happened that he was demoted after less than a year. The fair-haired boy didn't think that things would turn out this way, and even thought that Keith should be praised for holding out for almost a year, but he only replied that working in a team was not for him. Alan Scotland, the first prince of the kingdom, spoke with Kit, and he nevertheless praised Kit for a good year, and admitted that all this would happen much earlier. And he added that he would resolve the issue with the Order. Keith said that if the leader of the Order continues in the same spirit, things will get worse. Suddenly, someone called Keith, it was Count Benoit Barry, who owned Magnolia and was the captain of the 11th Knight Order, and he complained about him for disobeying his plan. Keith said that he had to act quickly, because at that moment the situation on the battlefield had changed somewhat. But the Count was already tired of hearing such excuses from him, and he could no longer let the repeated arbitrariness and abuse of his authority go unpunished. But Keith just chuckled, saying that nothing had happened, there had been no losses, and the demons had been eliminated. Venua then said that it was not about the result at all, but that his actions were a serious crime that undermined the discipline of their knights, and he also added about Keith's familiarity. He is the current head of the Bari family, who achieved great success in the previous war between humans and demons. And since he was talking about it, Keith advised him to watch his language. Besides, in the previous war, it was the previous Count, Eric Bari, who achieved success, not Venua. The Count was furious at this statement and reached for his sword on his belt. He drew his sword and swung at him with an angry cry, intending to kill him. But Keith, without batting an eye, with a deft movement of his body, quickly went behind the Count's back. Clenching his fist and swinging it back, he said that if the Count had enough strength to defeat him, it would be much less troublesome for the others. And he hit him right in the jaw, causing him to fall to the floor. The other knights were horrified by such an act of Keith. Alan couldn't believe that there were still people who would raise their hand against an aristocrat at the age of 20. When Keith asked if there was anything that could be changed or done about it, because as long as the Count was in command, it could cause harm. In the current situation, this is not difficult, Alan said, since the House of Lords has a strong influence on the composition of the knights, and there is nothing he can do about it, no matter how you look at it. But he really would like to do something about it. Keith then asked why the demotion was even possible, because he thought he was going to be sent back to war. In truth, Alan received a message from the House of Lords. At his behest, the decision to expel Keith from the Knightly Order was protested. Keith asked if this had caused Alan any difficulties. He replied that he absolutely did not, because he did not care. And besides, it was Keith who was the cause of the problem. Initially, the 11th Order had a low position. People who created problems occupied high positions in the Order, setting a bad example. And since that was the case, Keith decided to ask what he should do now, and whether it would not be better to return to the life of an explorer. Alan knew his abilities very well, so he knows that if he puts him in the front line, he will not get the desired result. He believes that the current order is unable to reclaim Keith's hometown, which is under the demon's influence, and Keith was in total agreement. But then Alan asked if there was a way to change the radical point of view. Keith was a little confused about what he meant by a radical point of view. Alan said that in fact Selena had wanted to get him for a long time. Then Keith remembered that Sister Selena worked in that very place. She is currently the director of the Royal Knight Academy, and Alan hinted that he, Keith with the title of Sage, would educate future knights as a teacher. When Keith heard this, he immediately began to reject this idea, because, firstly, he does not see himself as a teacher, and secondly, he has a rather peculiar relationship with magic. But Alan was not against it, and anyway, this issue had already been decided, and from next month he would start working as a teacher at the same hour. And the next month was already starting tomorrow, but Alan didn't see a problem with that. Keith was a little furious at such a spontaneous decision of the, as he called it, evil prince. But Alan even took it as a compliment. He realized that he didn't even have the option to refuse, and besides, it was their alma mater, so they were both classmates. 2 days have passed since that conversation, and Keith was already standing in front of the academy, which was very huge. The Royal Knight Academy is an educational institution that trains knights to fight demons. This place for the elite located in the capital is much more difficult to study than a simple academy. Looking at the academy, Keith felt a hint of nostalgia. After all, he graduated from this academy at the age of 13. Although students usually graduate at 18, Keith managed to skip several grades due to his genius. While he stood there and was nostalgic, he noticed how the local students were looking at him sideways, and he realized that he should first go to see Sister Selena. When he entered the principal's office, he was met by Selena, the principal of the Royal Knight Academy, and also an older friend of Keith and Alan, who had the title of Sage. They had not seen each other for a long time, and she was very happy because she thought that he would not come. But Keith arrived and, smiling back, greeted Selena. Selena also felt nostalgic and remembered her school days. Keith noticed that she hadn't changed at all. Without delay, she decided to cut to the chase and said that Keith would be working at the academy as a teacher. He will be assigned Class 1A. They all just entered and are still very young, so it will not be difficult for him. He will also give lectures on his specialty, make his schedule such that he does not have a heavy workload and has enough free time, and he can spend it on his own research. It was clear that Selena was well prepared for this. Keith liked the fact that he would be able to do his research, but still decided to ask if everything would be okay. Selena confirmed this, as he believes that his research into increasing the survival rate of knights will be beneficial. Therefore, they will prepare a laboratory for him. But if suddenly something is missing, she told him to boldly ask for it. She promised to try to prepare everything that she can get within the limits of her authority. Keith couldn't say anything more than a simple thank you and called her Sister Cell. Selena then decided to tell him about the precautions. And first of all, she asked him to stop calling her Sister Cell. Because she is the principal and he is an ordinary teacher, this was permissible while they were alone, but in public, they would have to speak as a principal and a teacher. Keith realized that even as a schoolboy, it would be strange to call Selena sister until she was 20. The next message was from Prince Alan, insisting that the sage's status must be kept secret, because it would be unpleasant if they found out that the sage had been demoted. That was totally Alan's style. Keith has never been very popular, so he thinks he should keep a low profile and hardly anyone will recognize him as a sage. And it would be good if Keith would refer to the documents to get the necessary information about the curriculum, and at this point she finished her explanation and waited for questions. He had one question. He asked why she wanted him to become a teacher at this academy, and called her the director. She said that in private it was okay to call her sister, but Keith wanted to get used to it as soon as possible. Selena, before answering his question, asked in return if he knew about the bias against the death of knights. During the 3 years of war, it is mostly the young soldiers who die among the knights, Keith answered, and this was absolutely true. Although each knight academy sends out many trained recruits each year, they are treated as easily replaceable. Especially a low-ranking order, if this continues, the more ignorant the captain, the more people will die. In the world, fighting demons is considered a competition, and to be honest, she thinks the situation is worse than ever. Keith agreed with this. Although it is considered a competition, humanity's right to life is decreasing every year. On the other hand, not everyone can return. Although it was sad, it was the bitter truth. In this situation, this only delays the collapse of the country. That is why it is necessary to temper students so early. He and Prince Alan had worked very hard on this problem, but they had already reached their limit. The level of graduates from the Royal Academy has certainly improved because Celine became the director. However, due to the Knights' training period being shortened as recruits, the deaths among them have only increased. Alan has also been secretly acting in various directions, and it will take some time before they get a noticeable result, but the demons will not wait that long. Selena, already with tears in her eyes, asked Keith to help the students for her sake and save them, because she could no longer see the report of graduates brutally killed in the war. At that moment, he realized that even for Selena, this was too much. He clenched his fist, made his decision, and then relaxed his hand. He has no experience raising others, and he doesn't know if he can raise them properly, so he can't promise to save them. But the place he is aiming for has not changed at all since that day, and it is a place he cannot reach on his own, which is why he will try his best to be a good teacher in order to achieve his goal. Selena, breathing a sigh of relief, thanked Keith, and then she suddenly teleported from her place straight to Keith to hug him. It was a space jump, a magic that is at the top of the space branch. It does not have many options for use, but Keith asked her not to use the highest magic in vain and waste her own strength in such quantities. But she replied that she was happy. Keith sighed and didn't object to it anymore. In the classroom of Class 1A, the students were already discussing the new teacher, and there was even a rumor that he came here after he was expelled from the order, so they were a little worried about this. Keith was standing next to this office and heard everything perfectly well, although this was true. It would have been possible to be more gentle with him. A few minutes later, the clock rang, which was a sign that the time had come. So he got ready to go into the office and open the door inside. He went inside, and all the students who were inside looked at him. Instantly, the classroom fell silent as Keith stood behind his teacher's desk. He introduced himself to the class and announced that from today on, he would be the class supervisor, and for some reason, he was late. So he told them not to hesitate to ask questions. One student raised his hand and wanted to ask a question. It was Graham. He had fire as his magical attribute. He was from a lowly aristocratic family, and his entrance exam results were above average. He immediately asked if it was true that Keith had been expelled from the order, and that was why he had turned against the teacher. Apparently, he's not afraid to ask such questions at all, or he's just honest to the point of stupidity. Keith confirmed this, saying that he had been on the front lines for about a year, but had proven unfit, and upon retiring, he decided to raise a new generation as a teacher. And he asked if he was satisfied with this answer. Graham was more or less satisfied with this answer, although he clearly did not expect such a direct answer. The students immediately began to whisper, and a background noise appeared from their whispers. This is not even surprising. For people, the fact that knights can be expelled from the order is generally unknown. From civilians, this is, of course, hidden. Although, in principle, there is no need to hide this, because it is even a little stupid. Then another student raised her hand and also wanted to ask a question. It was Aristella Grantless. She had two magical attributes, wind and water. She is the fourth daughter of the ducal house. She has the best result on the entrance exam, is an excellent student, and at the time of admission is able to work with two attributes at once. She said that she entered the academy to become a better knight, but she never thought that she would be trained by a knight who was expelled from the order, and asked if she could become a great knight. Keith said that only she could decide that. Aristella flinched and asked what he meant. He explained that if their grades changed depending on the teacher's qualifications, it means they were like that from the beginning. Fortunately, if they got into this academy, it will give them unlimited knowledge. There are many documents that can be viewed. The best conditions for learning and training have been created for them. If, of course, she really wants to study, he added at the end, which made Aristella uneasy. She called him irresponsible and asked if this was not sophistry. But Keith replied that if she didn't like his classes, she didn't have to come, and he would count it as attendance and would give her a pass without any problems. Aristella then slapped her palms on the table, because that's not what she meant. She asked that by saying this, he was not admitting his helplessness and forcing the students to work. The students looked at each other, and Keith looked at her. Keith asked if this meant she wanted to hear praise and wanted to say that because of their powerlessness, they needed special treatment. Aristella replied that this was not exactly what she meant, but admitted that his version was quite suitable. Aristella Grantless, the fourth daughter of the ducal house, wants to become the head of the best and most famous First Order of Knights. Keith thinks she's snapping. Because of the pride she inherited from her father, he didn't think things would be so bad here, and he couldn't even believe that this was the first place in the academy. But this intrigued him even more than it upset him. In terms of strength, she is inferior to Selena and Alan when they were at the academy, but he does not think that this can be considered a problem. The most important thing now is her will. The so-called will to become the best knight. Is Aristella's will really that strong? Keith agreed with her words because there was some truth in them, and in truth, he thought so too. Every time he sees a weak person in power, he thinks he needs to shut his nasty mouth right now, he said with a menacing look. The class was a little tense from the heavy atmosphere from their new teacher, so they sat in silence. Suddenly, the bell rang, although they had not yet finished their discussion, but he decided to end the class hour for today. Then they would have practical training, so he suggested that they change the content of their course a little. Apparently, there are those who don't take their abilities seriously, so he'll give them an impromptu fight. One of the students said that they would never be able to defeat the former knight one-on-one, but Keith then offered them a head start and would allow them to attack with as many as 10 men at a time. The students were outraged because whatever it was, it looked like bullying. Aristella decided to add that usually the first years of this academy would team up in threes, and she asked if he knew that they could defeat a mid-ranking knight. Keith knew that this was usually the case. Numerical advantage is an excellent condition for this type of magical combat, but then they simply won't be able to lose. That's what Aristella is getting at. But Keith asked why they didn't try then, since they were going to win anyway. So I told them to change their clothes and gather at the training ground. Aristella thought he was literally mocking them with his fist clenched. After some time, they all gathered at the training ground. Fairy, one of the students, asked Keith why he didn't change his uniform himself. Fairy's results on the exam were low, and all because she is a commoner. Fairy asked him to wear the uniform because it was very cool and high-tech. Keith asked not to pay attention to this, but again, Aristella was outraged by his words. She asked how much longer he would continue to make them look bad. But Keith didn't even think of doing this. He just needed special training. Turning around, she advised them to pray that the uniform would not fall into disrepair, and she walked out to the rest of the crowd from the class and shouted at them to start packing up, while Keith and Fairy looked after her. Keith thought he was hated, but Fairy didn't even see any reason to hate him. He then asked Fairy if she needed to get ready too, because Aristella was very angry right now, and right now she was glaring at Fairy. Fairy complained that the teacher hadn't said anything earlier, even though he had announced the assembly, but she still went to all the other students. As expected, there is no discord between commoners and nobles in this class, and the one responsible for creating this environment is Aristella. But he still can't understand just from the documents, although it's a little rude, but he decided to watch the kids. The students warmed up and talked before the training fight, and when they had all passed each other, they all came up to Keith together. Keith decided to start with precautions. Although it is a simulated battle, most of the physical damage is replaced by magical damage. In other words, they don't have to worry about getting hurt. But if they take a lot of damage, they will faint, which won't happen in the rest of the lessons, so he told them not to overdo it. One student asked him if he was their only opponent. It was Bellamy, who had the magical attribute of Earth, was born into a noble family, and had high results in the entrance exam. Keith said that if they underestimate him, then it is only their own problem. And from that moment on, he announced the start of the battle so as not to delay for long. Instantly, a whole bunch of magic circles and spells appeared around Keith, which were directed at him. Everyone was casting spells, Bellamy, Aristella, even Fairy and everyone else. But Keith wasn't at all embarrassed by this. He simply waved his hand and reflected almost all magical attacks. All the students were surprised by his antics, and most of them became tense. He, of course, tried to do this, having seen it once, and that was a long time ago, but still, like Selena, he couldn't do it, so he even went a little overboard. The students didn't understand what it was, but then they realized that their teacher didn't have magic as one of his 4 main attributes, and Bellamy couldn't believe that someone who was expelled from the order after less than a year of service was using space magic. Suddenly, Aristella ordered everyone to be silent and catch the silence. She said that they were now in the very center of the battle, and told them to think only about the enemy and not to lose their vigilance. Keith asked if they really thought they could take him out with just one blow. But Aristella was not sure of this, and even on the contrary, she expected it. On the battlefield, dirty tricks are natural, Keith added. Therefore, in a real fight, it is not always possible to carry it out strictly according to tactics or plan. He pointed his palm towards Aristella. She didn't understand what he was trying to do, but when Keith squeezed his hand, her body suddenly went numb. She didn't understand what was happening because she couldn't move or even talk, and only then did she realize that control over her body had been taken over. As he pulled his hand back, Aristella also reached straight towards him, and so their commander became a hostage, and asked everyone else what they would do now that they had no commander. One of the students was indignant, because he was sure that such a thing simply could not happen to a knight. Although it was mean, it was a common situation in the field with demons, and he asked if they would also tell a demon who did not understand human language that it was mean. Aristella didn't think so in her mind. Keith told them to imagine that this was a real battle, and that he himself was a demon, and he had captured their dear comrade, and finally asked them the question, what would they do? Whether they save her, prepared to suffer greatly, or in order to protect others, they attack the demon that holds their comrade captive. Suddenly, Aristella turned her head to Keith and was able to say that if she were faced with such a choice, she would choose death. Her body began to glow, which surprised Keith greatly. This glow was the magical power of Aristella, that is, it was her combined magic of water and wind. There is a limit to the amount of magical power humans can handle at one time, but Aristella has clearly removed that limiter that was set up for her own protection. and she was able to break free from his hands, jumping back slightly from his grip. They looked at each other, and without any hesitation, Aristella instantly cast the Albari spell, creating a water hurricane over Keith's head in a matter of seconds. It was huge and strong. Such was the strength of Aristella Grantless, and even more terrifying than before, Keith noted. But when the water hurricane began to descend on Keith, Aristella saw some kind of grin on his face. All of Aristella's other classmates were happy for her victory, even though it seemed like she might have overdone it with her attack. But the teacher himself underestimated them. This hurricane was the most powerful attack she could create, and it hit the target right on target. But she was still bothered by something, namely the face he had before the spell descended on him, and she doubted that any damage had been done. A few seconds later, when the hurricane had dissipated, she saw the teacher standing unharmed in the same place where he had been standing. There was not a scratch on him, and he was only adjusting his coat and sleeves, as if a breeze had blown on him. Keith really didn't think that a paralyzed hostage would be capable of doing something like that, and that's why he's wary of dirty tricks in a real fight. Bellamy asked how he remained unharmed, since the spell had hit him and not missed. But Keith wasn't about to give away his secret to staying safe that easily. Because understanding the enemy's abilities is one of the basics of battle. But in order to understand how he survived such a powerful attack, he suggested that they defeat him first. The students tensed up again and got into fighting stances to continue the training fight. Suddenly, Aristella took 3 small kunai and threw them straight at Keith, catching him off guard again. But the kunai didn't even reach him, and hit the air around the teacher, and then Aristella understood everything. She announced to all her classmates that Keith was a defense mage who specialized in magical barriers. The students were surprised that he was using a magical barrier. She also suggested that their teacher might specialize in self-defense. Keith was surprised that she was able to recognize the protective barrier at first glance. She had a talent for magic that could not be broken if you add observation and the ability to analyze. She can become the knight she dreams of, and this applies not only to Aristella. Aristella clicked to everyone that they would have a chance to win if they all attacked together. She gave the command to all close combat fighters to draw their weapons and move to the vanguard. And she ordered the rear guard to attack in periods and try not to hit the allies. Those who are able to concentrate on what is important are called military leaders, and the real training fight begins right now. All the students attacked at the same time, just as Aristella had ordered. The melee fighters ran forward, and the rear guard stood behind and cast spells. They sometimes had some good attacks, but something confused Keith. He noticed that Aristella was nowhere to be found on the battlefield. While he was defending himself from the attacks of all the students, he felt mana behind him. And when he turned around, he saw Aristella there, standing and glowing just like at that moment. She used joint magic, and she released the excess of this magical power. It was logical that this could lead to very bad consequences. He then disappeared from the sight of all the students, quickly moving towards Aristella. And he told her that he would stop her, because he could no longer ignore it. After hitting her head and releasing her magic, Aristella lost consciousness, thus being declared the loser. But the students did not hesitate, and continued the attack on Keith to avenge Aristella. In any case, they were all also extremely promising, and apparently these are also the fruits of Sister Selena's educational reform. It wasn't bad at all, Keith noted. Therefore, he incited them to attack even more and stronger, asking them if they had already managed to run out of breath, and so they continued the fight. When the training fight was over, Aristella was carried to the medical room. When she opened it, she remembered little of the recent events. She was met by the local healer magician, Acris, a doctor responsible for work in the medical office, and she was also 1 year younger than Alan and Keith. She heard that Aristella had fallen during a training fight. There was no fever, and there shouldn't be any problems with using too much magic, she said. Aristella sat and thought, remembering the moment when she lost consciousness. It seemed to her that the teacher, who should have been standing surrounded by students, simply disappeared right before her eyes, but she had no idea what it could have been, because unlike Principal Selena's space jumping, he moved in a linear fashion. Wind magic or body enhancement magic, even if you take these two types, she didn't understand how much magic he could still use. Moreover, all of its uses were at a very high level. But what irritated her the most was that he was fighting more than 30 students at once. This was definitely too much, and she wondered why he was like this. Acris asked her if she wanted to hear the results of the battle, but she refused, because at the moment they cannot cope with such an opponent. Acris smirked and then added, quoting Keith's teacher. He called Aristella very promising. She didn't even immediately believe that Teacher Keith could really call her promising. Once she opened her eyes, she accepted reality as it is. When Aristella heard this from Akris, she suddenly got the impression that the healer mage and Teacher Keith were very familiar, so she immediately asked it directly. Akris replied that they had only recently met, so she knew him a little more than Aristella, although in fact she had studied with him at the same academy. She was just a year younger, and Principal Selena had told her to keep quiet about this fact. Aristella became interested in this Teacher Keith, namely, who he was. Akris didn't know this, but she still asked if he had really surprised Aristella that much. She replied that this was true because just yesterday she thought that she could surpass her father, whom she considered the strongest. Aristella's father serves faithfully as a captain in the most powerful and famous First Order, and she claims that there is someone who surpasses such a person in abilities. Keith definitely overdid it on his first day. Akris expected that, but then she said that it was a great luck that they would be learning and training from such a strong person. Since she is so talented, she will definitely become stronger, Akris said. But Aristella was not confident in her talent. But then she remembered the moment when her father said something to her. He insisted that excessive modesty is destructive, and that they respect efforts and despise laziness. So she took this chance to become stronger. Together with Teacher Keith, and she's acting exactly like Teacher Keith said, Akris thought to herself. So she supported her and added that she would root for her a lot. And since Akris supports her, Aristella will do everything in her power. She wanted to get out of bed because she was interested in how the other guys were doing. Suddenly, a strange feeling of either pain or numbness passed through her, and she fell back, but luckily, Akris was sitting behind her and caught her. She said that she couldn't move yet because the symptoms of magical exhaustion could still appear, and therefore Aristella should rest for a while longer. Aristella understood everything and went back to bed, since she had no reason to rush anywhere anyway. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Knightly Order, some people were very unhappy that Keith Brandon's punishment was so light. It was Count Venois Bory, commander of the 11th Knightly Order, and he complained that Keith had simply been expelled from the order, and nothing more. Although Keith belonged to the 11th Order, strictly speaking, he was not treated as their subordinate. Besides, he is a sage. The king decides how to deal with a sage, as long as he has connections with Prince Alan, who is responsible for most of the affairs. Even if it was possible to expel him from the order, it would not be possible to impose a great punishment. This really infuriated the Count, causing him to flip the table over in anger. He didn't like the way Keith was causing disorder in his order, and he saw him as a villain with sharp horns. And all because of him, all his subordinates stopped respecting the Count, and now no one respects him at all. In class, Keith told the students first of all that even if they became knights now, not even a year would pass before they all died. This statement left the class speechless, so everyone sat silently and quietly. Emile, who had excellent results after Aristella and Raoul, asked if it wasn't an exaggeration that they would all die, since none of them were going to be as strong as Keith. Keith couldn't help but think about it. But the fact that the strongest first year, Aristella, is not in this room, proves it. And it was absolutely true, because now she is resting in the medical office. But despite this, even for these 3 years before graduation, they need to work hard, study and train, in order to gain the strength to easily defeat demons. As he already said during class hour, if they don't need classes, then they don't have to come. But if they show results, he won't even think about denying their way of thinking. One of the students, Fairy, raised her hand and decided to ask what if Keith's lessons alone weren't enough for this. But that wasn't what Keith was talking about, so he decided to give an example and turned to Lina Linbull. Her family had been excellent scouts for generations, she confirmed this. Graham dramatically asked how he knew what was going on at Lynn's house, and he replied that he was a teacher, so he knew. So he decided not to dwell on it too much, and returned to the discussion. Intelligence is a role that requires even a knight to have special skills in magic. Even so, if Lina wants to excel in intelligence, wouldn't it be more effective to study the same curriculum as everyone else? He asked. Lina asked if he meant that it was worth trying harder to achieve your goal, and she was absolutely right. But Keith decided to be honest. He wasn't going to judge their efforts. He will evaluate what kind of magic they use and how strong they become. That is, he will only evaluate the result. Moreover, efforts are needed to make up for the lack of abilities, and not to hide or conceal them, but to talk about them showing immediate results, no matter what the method, would be very cruel. Therefore, to begin with, they will have to identify their strengths and weaknesses, and he himself will show some techniques that'll help strengthen the strengths and overcome the weaknesses. Sarika, another student in the class, said that he had only been appointed as their class teacher today, and he didn't even really know anything about them. But Keith actually knew all of their academic results for the past month, so it wasn't a big problem, and their strength in their mock battle was proof of that. All the students were a little shocked by the kind of person their teacher was, but they didn't think he was a very bad person. Then, first of all, he decided to talk about how the training fight went. After some time, Aristella finally left the medical office. She couldn't believe that she slept until the end of the school day. But first, she wanted to meet him. When she went to the board where the teachers' names and their classrooms were written, she did not find his name on it. The head teacher, Mary, said that it was worth checking this board, because if you were looking for a teacher, it would definitely be in his office. She couldn't find Keith even in the staff room, so she thought they might have missed each other. While she stood there wondering where their teacher was, he suddenly appeared behind her and asked if she was looking for him. She screamed in surprise and turned to face him. Keith was a little confused that she was scared. Aristella replied that anyone would be scared if someone called him from behind. He heard from the doctor that she was unwell, but looking at her, he realized that now everything was fine. Aristella immediately apologized for the inconvenience and bowed, but Keith was not very afraid. But he still asked what she wanted to ask him. As it turned out, she didn't have a question, but rather a request to talk to him, if of course he had some extra time. He thought she wanted to talk about today's lesson, and found her to be quite hardworking. So he turned around and told her to follow him so they could talk in the office. She immediately followed him at his side. Aristella asked him where his office was, because before, she didn't find it on the signboard. But that made sense because he was only hired yesterday, so he hadn't been added to the board yet. His office was the largest room at the end of the corridor. Approaching the door, he began to enter the password for the room. She thought it was a magic password that she had not seen before. He showed her his office, but admitted that he didn't think he'd bring anyone in there, so several boxes were still unpacked. But first, he told her not to touch anything here, otherwise there would be a big explosion. Aristella looked around the room and saw many wonderful objects, from books and ink and a pen to magical objects. Keith told her to sit on the couch while she looked around his room. When they sat down opposite each other, Keith asked her what she wanted to talk about. She decided to start with an apology, or rather, about what happened this morning. Because of the rumors that he was expelled from the order after a year of service, she was sure that it was because he did not try hard enough as a knight. However, the strength he demonstrated in the training fight cannot be obtained half-heartedly. She criticized him because of her prejudices. So she bowed again and asked his forgiveness. Keith reacted very flatly, not giving any reaction at all, just saying, "Good." Aristella was a little surprised by his reaction. She thought he would start scolding her because of this, but this did not happen. Keith replied that he wasn't that limited, so whatever she thought he was something else entirely. Aristella was sure that usually, at such moments, people should be angry. But in fact, he had something to say about her two-part magic. He looked at her while Aristella pricked up her ears. Her spell, Albari, was a magic that was clearly too powerful for her, so if she kept it up, one day she wouldn't be able to handle the backlash, Keith warned her. He didn't understand where she was rushing to, but if she was suddenly thinking about plans for the future, then it would be better to refrain from this. Aristella said nothing in response, and Keith only sighed, deciding to continue his monologue. He added that if she still wanted to use her Albari spell, she should first increase the efficiency of the magic transformation technique. Of course, with the base load, her magical abilities would also grow. She replied that Keith was indeed fickle, and although he said not to use this magic, she thought that in some situations it was acceptable. But if he said that, no matter how far she went, the choice would be hers alone. Only she herself will be responsible for her decision. Aristella was a little surprised by this answer, but did not mind. But then she asked if she could ask one more question. Keith didn't know if he could answer it, but he decided to listen to him. Aristella asked what Teacher Keith thought of them, that is, of the students. When he asked her what she meant, she said that he had been a knight but had suddenly become a teacher, and asked if Keith was happy with the outcome. In a second, it became a completely different question, like some kind of carousel, so he asked her to ask clearly if she really wanted to question him. So Aristella asked him if he liked being a knight, and if he was sure he could take care of them all. Then Keith understood everything that Aristella wanted to ask. All this time she was worried about whether she could become a good knight or not, but he wondered why she was in such a hurry when she could use dual magic. why she was worried when she was so talented. He then raised his head and looked at her, and he replied that he didn't think zeal was such an important trait. He is of the opinion that it doesn't matter whether there is this zeal or not. If there is a result, then good, and it seems that this is what she wanted to hear from him. Keith works with the intention of achieving excellent results in his role as a teacher so that they can grow as strong knights and survive. Aristella then asked if this could be believed. After a short silence, Keith replied that this was something she alone should decide, and no one else. After finishing the conversation, she apologized again and then left the office. Taking a breath, she silently walked further down the corridor. The next day, he was already starting the lesson, and the first lesson he announced was the basics of magic. To his surprise, all the students came to class, and he thought that some of them would take a break, but none of them deceived themselves. Graham suddenly asked what page they should open their textbooks to. Keith remembered that he forgot to tell them yesterday, so he said it now. They wouldn't be using textbooks in these classes, so he told them that they could put them away, or even not bring them at all. Fairy asked why they weren't going to study from them, and then decided to take a guess, assuming that there was something wrong with their textbooks, and she was right. The textbook does not include the latest research, and some of the information in it is outdated, of course. Not that this is such a big problem in practice. But since this is the case, he decided to teach them from scratch everything related to magic. The students were shocked by this turn of events. They realized that the teacher was even more confident today than usual, but that was understandable. He was a professional in magic. In the principal's office, it turned out that Selena herself told him that he could not use the textbook. It was, after all, long outdated. Here and there, the facts differed. But magic is Keith's specialty. Keith reminded him that the magical theory was rather peculiar, and asked again if he was definitely not against it. She replied that he had become a sage after developing a number of new theories through his own research, so she told him to believe in himself, since that was his specialty. He got the go-ahead from Sister Selena, so everything was fine. Keith then decided to start the lesson by covering the basics. To begin with, he explained that when they use magic, they use the so-called magical power. It is in the air, and can accumulate in the human body through the senses, although this understanding was earlier. According to recent discoveries, what is in the air is called a magical element, which is clearly different from the magical power of the body. Aristella raised her hand and asked what a magical element was and how it differed from magical power. He replied that it had been discovered that magical elements in their original state could not be transformed into magic using technique. In the past, research was conducted on using a huge device to use high magic, but the reason for its discontinuation was that the magical elements in the air could not be converted into magic. Bellamy asked about the magical instruments. Keith explained that a magic tool is a mechanism in which the user's magical power reacts to the technique engraved on the tool. Also, magic tools don't require much magic. They are things for everyday use after all, so there is no need to gather magic elements out of thin air from the start. However, magical elements are automatically converted into magical power the moment they take them into their bodies, so they don't need to worry about it when using their magic. Exhaling, he turned to the board, deciding to move on to transforming magic. In truth, when transforming magical elements into power, not all become the same type. Power can be divided into several types depending on the origin. They correspond to the conventional attributes of fire, wind, water, and earth magic. It is said that the attributes that they can use well change depending on how well they wield them. The professor explains about a type of magical power that is passed down through generations. The student objects that this is not a topic that has been studied yet. The teacher replies that they will study this material now. He mentions that sometimes the whole family uses the same attributes. It is for this reason that the professor talks about the topic. The students hung their heads sadly because they could not keep up with the teacher's pace. They were waiting for the day to end. All the students looked at Professor Keith sadly. The class hour has begun, but instead of starting a new topic, he asks the students questions. The teacher asked Raoul what his goal was. Raoul wanted to become the best knight. Keith had expected that answer. He says that others have more precise goals, but they will still ultimately have an end goal. Raoul misunderstood and thought the final goal was to get 100 points on the test. The teacher says that this is also an important goal, but that is not what he is talking about. Keith mentions a tournament that will take place next month. Aristella, realizing what is being talked about, says that it is a tournament in which all classes from 1st to 3rd years participate. The teacher makes an important point that the class must choose a goal for all of them. Students think about the fact that they need to choose a goal not for themselves, but for the whole class. The man is mentally calculating how to create a lesson plan for his students. He is distracted by the man who has come into the staff room. Balak is surprised that the new teacher, who transferred a week ago, is working on a day off. For the young teacher, the transfer was sudden, but the work was not that difficult. Balak is glad that the new teachers are so enthusiastic. After all, he was upset that the teachers at the academy were indifferent and never became members of the knightly order. Balak is burning with enthusiasm, and in order not to disgrace the name of a member of the knightly order, he decides to try too. Keith Brandon says that the former commander is known as an attentive teacher, although students call him a demon. Professor Keith himself says that there are many who love the former commander. The former commander just laughs when he hears his students call him. As he remembers and asks the young teacher about his class, Keith is already thinking that they did something wrong. Balak only noticed that something had changed in Class 1A. The man immediately changes his mind, saying that the students were excellent students from the start. It was only the fact that they were filled with rage or motivation that surprised him. Keith says that he hasn't really changed anything, he's just defined a common goal for the class. He then asks Balak about his subject. The young professor thought that the strategy he had used had worked, and that was why the students had changed their goal. The old professor was slightly surprised that he could not help but ask what goal the students had chosen. He says their goal is to win the tournament next month. Balak cries out in disbelief. Keith briefly remembers Sister Cell. Last year, there were first years who achieved this result, but the older professor is sure that Class 3C will win this tournament. Professor Keith tenses up and asks Balak if he means student Luca Rivet. Balak chuckles at the fact that the new teacher already knows a lot. And yet he acknowledges the fact that she is a genius, as are the students in this class. Luca Riki is a class representative of Class 3C. She is known to many for her outstanding abilities on the battlefield. Keith mentions that she fought a graduate who was already an active knight. The result of that fight was a draw, but she always fights for supremacy. With her understanding of tactics and her sound judgment, she is ideal for the role of commander. The young man thinks that if Class 1A is aiming for victory, then the biggest obstacle will be Class 3C with the class leader Luca Rivet. Rivet's abilities, and yet believes that after a month of teaching students, he confidently states that they will not have an enemy that cannot be defeated. A woman enters Keith Brandon's office, apologizing for intruding. Immediately, questions began to emanate from the office. She asked Keith about himself, how he was feeling, and how he was doing with his students. The man noted that he was 20 years old, looking at his interlocutor. Akris only said that she knew about it. Turning away, Akris mentions that even though she's been working here for 4 years, she still considers him her senior. Keith doesn't understand what she means by that. She laughs and says that he has never changed. The man is not surprised by her rudeness. Keith noticed that she had become calmer, more in control. She asked him if he was charmed by her. Brandon only replied that such words would be more appropriate for Sister Cell, to which she pouted. Unable to restrain herself, the girl smiled and said that if she let it slip, Sister Cell's name would immediately be mentioned. Keith, wasting no time, asks what business she has come for. Akris immediately answers that he has not changed his habits at all, and yet she is there because she is concerned about a student. The professor immediately understands that he is talking about Aristella. She is surprised by the man's ingenuity, to which he replies that they had no other topics except this, and Akris immediately senses a potential threat in a person. Keith apologizes, but he doesn't know such details. He says that Aristella has calmed down a bit, but it's quite possible that she's pretending. Akris thinks that something might have happened to her family. He has already tried to find out everything he could, pulling the papers towards him. He reads aloud and says that Aristella is the youngest daughter and she has 3 brothers and 3 sisters. All of them have achieved excellent results under the guidance of their father. She understands and paraphrases his words, that people who have achieved success are a burden if others expect something from you. Keith almost agrees with her. It's just a first impression, he explains, but it's wrong. After all, the professor next says that she looks as if she's scared of something. The woman in the office asks again. She agrees with him. Keith replies that he got that impression and is inclined to believe it. He exhales and says that the family, and even the Granley's people, speak the truth to your face. Akris admits that even if it is offensive, there is nothing you can do about it. The professor says that if Aristella is afraid of losing, then he must deal with it. Akris smirked, and Keith decided he might have said something strange. She reassures him by noting that he thinks highly of Aristella. Keith looks at her with bewilderment. The woman explains that it is unusual for her to hear such things from him. After all, usually only talented people matter to him, to know what abilities they have and what they can do. In her mind, Aristella was of no value, but perhaps one day she would be important to Keith. Akris voiced her thoughts with a grin. Her words were spoken with envy, in a large office where there were only the two of them. Turning it all into a joke, Akris said that she also wants to be important to someone. Keith still looked at her with bewilderment, not understanding what she meant. The woman smiled in confusion. He said with complete seriousness that she was also very important to him. The professor asked her why she had such doubts. Akris only smiled sheepishly. Exhaling, he added that even if the person was good, he would not waste his time on him. Now Akris smiled, agreeing with his words. So he asks her if the students need help at the medical center to take good care of them. Dr. Akris replies that he will do so. A rainstorm hits Fort Klingsor, located southwest of the capital on the western border of Magnolia territory. A loud slap of a palm on a table is heard in the room. A short man raises his voice, declaring the need for supplies for the next major operation. He is interrupted by another man, who remains polite. Franz, from the Magnolia family, calmly explains the situation and reports that the operation cannot be carried out within the specified time frame. The man asks irritably. Franz continues, mentioning the continuing defeats and the large number of wounded. He notes that the Knights also conduct dangerous operations, but considers their actions reckless. This causes a burst of rage in the interlocutor. They both start shouting. The short man accuses Franz of mocking him, while Franz himself also wants to defeat the monsters. Franz asks him if he is not against the destruction of the country. He emphasizes that even when collaborating, their relationship must be equal, and Magnolia cannot submit to someone else's point of view. The young representative of the Magnolia family sullenly states that this is the unanimous opinion of the entire family. An older man makes a harsh comment about the lords. Franz decides to express his objective opinion. With cold determination, Franz asks if he knows the real reason for what is happening. The angry interlocutor remains silent as he is asked to leave the room. Franz leaves, heading towards the wounded, and casually mentions Keith's name. The man is furious, accusing Franz of neglect and yelling at who he thinks he is. Meanwhile, in the carriage, the head of the Bari family, Manhwa, smirked, mentally developing a plan to turn the situation to his advantage. His subordinate asks about Keith, mentioned by Franz. The Lord explains that Keith was a distinguished member of the Order. Despite Keith's departure, Franz intends to do everything possible to protect these lands from demons. Professor Keith has gathered his students and is starting a training battle. In order to make it easier to cooperate with his comrades, he divides them into threes. The trio were at least one in the Order of Knights, so they needed to learn how to fight with such a number of people. The students are divided into teams, Teacher Keith checks, as he was called, right away. No matter what the teacher says, the balance of power is terrible. Keith doesn't understand why Raoul isn't happy with his teammates. Raoul says that on the contrary, his team is stronger. The professor replies that he is confident in himself, therefore he will not interfere, and wants them to show the result of their confidence. The man turns away and calls those who everyone considered a weak team. Raoul looks on and does not understand what the teacher is doing. The girl asks if they have a terrible team. She says with a smile that they are the scum of the class. The teacher confirms this. The girl wants to change places with Raoul because the others have the element of fire. Her teammates ask indignantly. She says she can't use the other 4 elements. Sarika asks if Fairy can use magic at all. Fairy answers that she can use healing, then she should choose water. Fairy asks Lina about her family and if she is good at tracking. She confirms. She wonders if it is suitable for combat. Lina thinks about it and says she'll do everything she can. Fairy replies that it's only enthusiasm that keeps everything going. The teacher says that they will be the ones to fight first, and that their opponents will be Aristelle's team. The team is shocked why their opponent is so strong. Keith sighs and replies that it's just... He suggests that their victory could change the perceptions of this class. They ask again if he means the armchair theory. Keith explains that no matter how weak they are, it's the best for beginners. After all, they were still able to enter the Royal Knight Academy, even with the lowest level of ability. No matter what method they use to fight, they should have a chance of winning. Lena says that they are bad at fighting. Sarika screams that they are a team of losers. Sarika has low magic power, Lena has weak magic output, Fairy has almost no striking power and can't hold a sword. Teacher Keith confirms, because it's no wonder they believe it. To Lena, he says that Aristella's team has excellent magical powers, to Sarika about excellent control, and to Fairy about swordsmanship. The three of them fall down in disappointment as the teacher continues that even together they won't win, but they don't need to compete in an area where their opponents are stronger. They try to show their strengths, but they can fight using the local position. The girls look doubtfully, says with a smile that this is a method of fighting for weaklings. Lena to detect enemy attacks with Fairy behind her using healing magic. He then placed Sarika on block so that she could use fire magic as a distraction. Fairy doesn't believe this plan. The teacher nods and tells them not to be heroes, but to just disrupt the enemy's plan. He explains that if they rush, the enemy will also change their battle plan. Therefore, either Sarika or Fairy should stand in the rear guard to attack. Sarika hesitantly replies that they won't be able to hold out. The professor continues and suggests attacking those who are not looking at Lena, surrounding them and striking together. The three girls thought about it, and Lena asked if they could do it. The man confidently declares that if they hadn't succeeded, he wouldn't have approached them. The girls' views on determination have changed. The girls enthusiastically say that they will try to do it. A student from another team looks at them. Team Aristella expresses their opinion, saying that the opposing team has completed their strategy, but there is some kind of catch. Keith watches as Aristella's crew discuss tactics. They decide to watch carefully first and then attack cautiously. The man tells the rules of the first round of the fight, raising his hand. The opponents stand ready. Keith announces the start of the fight. Aristella recalls Balak's strategy lesson about forming trios. Similar types of engagements are used in operations, Aristella analyzes, noting that the opponents do not have a strong mage. She thinks about using Raoul's magic. The thought that they won is spinning in their minds. Raoul and Lena clash with swords. Sarika attacks with fire magic. Raoul dodges the attack, talking about the obstacle. Aristella attacks sharply. Her attack is blocked by Lena, to which Aristella does not believe it. Lena holds her sword firmly, frowning at her opponent. Aristella did not expect to see Lena. Raoul apologizes for not keeping an eye on Lena. She turned out to be faster. Lena stands firm, looking at them with determination as they offer to crush her together. First he attacks Aristella, immediately dodging the enemy's attack. Raoul runs to the side to swing his sword. Lena notices and jumps back. Raoul still reaches her and attacks, colliding with his opponent's sword. The girl steps back. Raoul and Aristella stand ready for battle. The guy is irritated that Lena can see their attacks well. A nearby student asks Keith what he did to her. The man says he can hardly help the students during training. Graham doesn't believe it, thinking it's too weird. After all, Lena moves more thoughtfully. The teacher explains that thanks to Fairy's magic, her physical strength is improving. The student still doesn't believe it and denies it. Keith goes on to explain that it has to do with magic, which Lena is already an expert in. This is what allows her to predict the enemy's actions. Graham repeats the words, looking at Lynn. Looking at her opponents, she analyzes which side the attack will come from in order to approach it. Lena looks at him sullenly and immediately anticipates the guy's actions. The teacher says that she lacks physical training. That's why she compensates for it, with the help of strengthening magic. After all, it's pointless to know someone else's actions if the body does not react quickly. Her task is to study the magic of strengthening and power for change. The teacher immediately states that Lena specializes in survival and does not have enough strength to overcome two. Graham immediately asks him if Aristella's team will ultimately win. The teacher didn't say that. Sarika's shelling would not have caused any harm to Raoul, to which the student admits that this is true. The guy says that Raoul should have used light magic like Sarika. Keith agrees with him. The professor notes from his observations that Raoul is good at quick magic. Graham does not understand the point of using powerful magic. Using powerful magic is good, the man replies, but she also has a weakness. Sarika takes aim and then shoots fireballs. These balls fly straight towards Raoul. Even among monsters, there are those who provoke others. If a knight uses time-consuming magic, he risks being a burden. The knight can use suitable magic to shoot, but with a low level like hers, which can deal with small demons. On the battlefield, it prevents demons from invading. The opponents are on combat alert. And depending on the situation and the method of conduct, the abilities also change. Emil and Aristella leave Lina and go on the offensive against Sarika. The teacher continues that no matter how powerful the force, if you do not know how to use it, you will be useless. The girls smiled as if expecting this. Aristella and Emil are surprised that they changed positions. Aristella commands that Sarika must be captured. Fairy uses body-strengthening magic. The girls prepare to attack with a scream. The three of them surrounded the two opponents. Aristella faces Lina and Emil faces Sarika. Their hands tremble as they hold the sword. Graham says their best attack has been repelled. Professor Keith just smiles. Suddenly, Fairy attacks, hitting two opponents. In front of the girls' team, two of the other team fall from a surprise attack. The girls look at the third opponent with determination. Raoul is surprised but understands and gives in. All the students who watched the fight were in shock. Teacher Keith praised, immediately ordering the winners to take the others to the medical room. The girls' team leaves, carrying the victims. Keith announces that the next match will begin right now. Dr. Actress tells Professor Keith that this is too much. She asks him how 10 people ended up in the medical office at once. He asks her to be quieter, to which Actress whispers, "Who is to blame for this?" Actress chatters indignantly. Keith remembers that she grumbled like that even in her school years. They see that Aristella has woken up. Even though it was her first fight, she recovered quickly. The teacher asks her how it feels to lose to the worst of the class. The girl replies by asking if he has no sense of tact. 7. He says that they chose the wrong way to fight, and if she developed the strategy, then she bears great responsibility for the defeat. Actress asks him to be gentle, to which Keith replies adamantly that it does not concern her. Keith only explains that Aristella needs to improve his strategy from defeat. Aristella understands that he is not angry and says the reason why they lost. She replies that she made up a strategy based on Teacher Balak's lesson but was initially wrong. The academy teaches how to fight demons, but not humans. The professor agrees and says that using the wrong tactics will put you far from victory. He asks her a question. Aristella thought about it. She immediately answers that Raoul's powerful magic was not needed to win. 15. The girl strategically talks about another combination of positions. Keith agrees with a smile. There is no point in arguing about their failure if they themselves found the right solution later. The teacher asks her if she was wary. Aristella replies that this is why she was in the middle position. He says thoughtfully that it was the right thing to do, but that it was also a way to make them vigilant. Keith says that she began to worry and be anxious, and so in a panic she clung to the theory. He continues that the weakness in her heart was the cause of the defeat. The teacher says that the strategy was formed for a specific purpose and failed to work. The answer for him was that because of her, her team lost. She says that next time, she will use this case when developing a strategy. The man agrees, because admitting one's mistake leads to growth. Actress immediately says that she will definitely win. Keith asks not to spoil her. Aristella understood the teacher's insistence, looking at them with a smile. Keith says that fighting against a human is not that important, especially when fighting demons. The student immediately indignantly denies it, because they want to win the tournament. Actress asks again, surprised by this. After all, there was no such thing as someone succeeding in this. Aristella replies that someone did it last year, so they can too. Actress asks if she can convince the class. She nods and answers yes. Actress grabs her hand harshly and wishes her luck, making her feel awkward. Aristella was the one who first supported the goal, after which the whole class adheres to this goal. There was a knock in the teacher's room and 3 students entered the room, asking permission. Professor Keith assumes that since the 3 of them came, the conversation will be about the fight. Sarika, instead, expresses gratitude to him. Keith did not understand, looking puzzled. Sarika. She says that since childhood she dreamed of getting into this academy, but when she came, she lost her confidence. At first she didn't believe that they had won the fight, but at that moment she was happy. Continuing, Sarika says that she felt a sense of security, even if it was thanks to Fairy and Lin. But it was thanks to the teacher, that's why she expresses gratitude to him. The teacher only answered dryly. He is really happy, but he is not satisfied with just one victory. Lina asks if they need to win the next battle too. The teacher nods. Let this not mean that there will be a special relationship without victory. Fairy commented that he sounded like he didn't want to put in the effort. The teacher pouted. Keith said that she thought he was suggesting something like that. Fairy denies it in a panic. Sarika says that at first they thought he was scary, but over time he surprised them. The teacher doesn't worry about it. Fairy continues with a smile, about how his smile is more like a smirk, with an ominous atmosphere. Their attitude changes to one of determination, asking the teacher to help them become stronger. He is pleased that they want to study, but he must talk about academic benefits. Fairy says that it's because he teaches everyone in the class, so she doesn't want to give in. Lina doesn't want to be the fifth wheel either. Professor Keith gives in to them and leaves to get permission to give them a special briefing at the training ground. The girls are happy, but not for long. The teacher tells them to prepare. The girls, already anticipating, ask to be more gentle. Selena bursts into the office, apologizing for intruding on Prince Alan. He was expecting her. Selena expresses gratitude for the incident, but then asks if he is sure that those who have been to the front will calm down. Alan replies that the knightly order is not suitable for him, because he does not trust people, does not cooperate. He even hit the captain, and yet he acknowledges his strategic management. The prince wants Keith to try his best as a teacher. Selena acknowledges his tactics. He continues that Keith understands the material well, and he himself understands why Selena wanted him. Selena recalls that during the academy years, Alan studied with Keith. He hurries to close the topic, even if his missed opportunity cannot reveal Keith's talent. Alan smiles and says that this is not enough, so he hopes for the older one. Selena froze. She asks him if there is any way to help Keith, who is one of the few people Prince Alan can trust. So he asks her to help Keith discreetly in his work as a teacher. She will do it herself without instructions. She asks if it makes sense for Keith to hide that he is a sage, but Alan replies that if they find out, will the students listen, and it is boring. Alan immediately changes his words, saying that Keith does not like being judged by rank. Selena heard him say that it was boring. He denies it. Sister Cell says thoughtfully that there is no doubt that Alan recognizes Keith. He specifies, for the sake of clarity, that it is only Keith's talent. The man smirks, saying that Keith's character is so hopeless. At the girls' training ground, the professor immediately steps on Fairy's hand, which was lying on the ground. Keith asks in disappointment. Earlier before, he gave out a plan that he would block Sarika and Lina's movements with magic. Even though they talk about teamwork, he only allows Fairy to move. The teacher starts blocking with magic. After he does, Keith asks them what they will do since the two's movements are sealed. Sarika immediately gives orders to Fairy, but her voice disappears. He explains that such a conclusion also seals the voice, and also specifies that she can do whatever she wants with them. The teacher pushes Serta, saying that Fairy will go against him alone. After all, she couldn't do it before, but now she can. Keith agrees, saying that there is not much difference between them and the rest of the class. Fairy runs to attack. The man suddenly and quickly appeared in front of her, not allowing her to attack, and pushed her away. He can't believe it, he just hit her. Fairy was on the ground. Keith explains that he only used her center of gravity when he brutally steps on her hand, since she has plenty of weak spots. Her cry of pain echoed across the training ground. Because of the pain, she was unable to hold the sword. Fairy holds her brush. The teacher asks in disappointment if this is the end. Declaring that the only one who could move had surrendered in disgraceful fashion, he wonders if they even have time to escape. 14. Fairy says that Sarika said so, and the teacher can't use his hands. He clarifies that if he hadn't used them, would they have been able to win at all? Keith confidently wields his sword against the other students, causing them to be surprised. The girl accuses him of his actions, to which he calmly replies that it is just a regular seizure. He notices that she is in a hurry again, and she calls his behavior dishonest. The guy advises to develop attentiveness and look for new ways to attack, despite criticism. The girl calls him a pervert, and he asks her not to come up with insults for him. He assigns punishment to the losers by demanding that they bring him a sword. The girl refuses to run, and he says that it will disrupt the effect of the body-strengthening magic. He suggests another way, recalling how one of the girls had already dealt with a similar situation. The girls stand there speechless as he watches them. The guy admits with a grin that he himself sealed their voices and cannot hear them. He reminds the students that they themselves asked him to teach them and must accept reality. The girls take a shower and discuss the behavior of the teacher, whom one of them calls a pervert. claiming that he is dangerous and made fun of them. One of the girls is indignant, remembering how she was forced to run during the entire training session and considers it cruel. The other responds that she understands her displeasure. The third girl says the teacher was actually telling the truth when he expressed doubt about the accusations. The other girls think about what was said without answering. One of the girls brings up the topic, which is surprising. Demons are such that they can block movements without even looking, especially those of medium size. The other one immediately remembers that we are talking about the phantom hands. The girl with long hair confirms that she is talking about them. Another participant finds this strange and wonders why such creatures actually exist. The girl continues to ponder and asks if it's strange that Teacher Keith was able to reproduce the abilities of the phantom palm, even though humans can't use demonic skills. A friend asks what the teacher's magical element is, noting that this is related to the previous question. The girl suggests that the element may not yet be known. The girls continue to discuss the situation with the teacher, and one of them expresses surprise that such a strong knight was fired, suggesting that he could have hit the captain of the order. One of the girls causes the others to laugh and react violently, as it seems impossible to them. They agree that the teacher, although stubborn, would not dare to do something like that. Besides, such actions usually lead to imprisonment. Elsewhere, a girl in a black dress stands in front of another character and says that she will give a message to Keith as soon as she returns. The girl she was addressing remembers that she needs to give the sage Brandon an imperial decree. The Academy is discussing that military operation number 1 is currently underway, and the battle order cannot be changed. The protagonist hears a mention of Graham and Bellamy and reacts to it. The students ask the teacher to listen to them, to which he, after a pause, responds with consent. Students argue that even when deviating from the plan, it is important to be able to quickly adapt to the circumstances. One of them notes that with a sudden change in plan, the team may become confused. He confirms that such situations do happen, and gives the example of a former knight who was forced to change his plan because his commander turned out to be incompetent. The teacher says that it is best to see everything in person, and advises to contact Teacher Balak so that he can show the battle protocols of the knightly orders. One of the students asks, what is contained in these protocols? The teacher adds that the students are still inclined towards theoretical thinking, do not see the real picture of the battle, and are stubborn. He explains that a combination of different theories on the battlefield, as well as decisions that deviate from theory, can often lead to victory. One of the students asks if the teacher wants to move on to the early stages of perceiving real combat, but he replies that he does not yet. A girl from the class asks if their past defeat in battle will be recorded as well. The teacher is silent and does not give an answer right away. He then confirms that the victory log will include data for each knight team, and the damage inflicted will also be recorded in detail. The students enthusiastically respond that they will definitely read the materials, and one of them mentally assesses the situation. In the next scene, the teacher enters the office and asks if the principal called him. The woman confirms that she did. The director reports that Prince Alan has conveyed an imperial order to Sage Brandon. The teacher reflects that he has no reason to refuse and understands that he will not be able to refuse the order. The teacher says that he and Alan have the same goal, but he is better at expressing it. Selena smiles, and the teacher asks what exactly Alan asked for. She reports that there was a gap in the northern front through which monsters entered. She then explains that the monsters are heading towards the capital and asks the teacher to intercept them before they attack the city. The teacher thoughtfully repeats the word demons, comprehending the situation. Selena says that one of them resembled a wyvern and they were not prepared for its appearance. The teacher reasons that the northern front is controlled by the Third Knightly Order, and such incidents are rare. The teacher replies, "That's how it is," confirming that he understood everything that was said. The wyvern is described as a dangerous B-class demon, with poisonous claws and tail, powerful armor, fireballs from its mouth, and powerful wing gusts, making it difficult to attack. The young man discusses the impossibility of transferring knights from the front capable of bringing down the wyvern, and mentions the possible difficulties of pursuit. The view of the city is accompanied by words about the presence of troops in the capital, but the difficulty of defending against the wyvern is emphasized. Wyverns are shown flying over the city, warning that if they appear, the city may be destroyed. The girl says she understands the situation and doesn't think she'll have any problems with the wyverns. The man thanks her. The girl asks if he wants to do anything else before they leave. The guy replies that he has no additional business, They hold hands, and the scene changes to a magical effect, hinting at the activation of teleportation or another transition. They find themselves in an open area and look around. The girl says that they seem to have arrived, but she doesn't see the people they need. The character points to the sky, noticing 3 wyverns hidden in a cloud, and notes that magic will be ineffective at this distance. 2 characters discuss how the report also listed 3 wyverns and express surprise that there are so few. The characters conclude that the wyverns have gathered in one group and decide to wait a little. A man and a woman stand in a clearing. He says that this is enough, and she adds that from a rational point of view, this would be too much. The young man raises his hand and announces that he is beginning. He activates a magic circle with symbols. The girl watches what is happening, and dark spheres form around him, a manifestation of the magic of the 4 elements. The black backgrounds explain that using 4 elements at once is very difficult, even in normal situations, but Keith is able to use and control such magic. It is explained that only Keith is capable of using this magic. Dark spheres shoot into the sky towards the wyverns, and one of them collides with the surface, creating an explosion. A girl with long dark hair says that the spheres are attracted to each other as she and Keith watch the sky. The wyverns find themselves inside a closed magic circle, and one of them is already tightly surrounded by spheres. Keith and the girl are standing next to each other. The girl smiles and says that everything worked out great. Keith explains that wyverns are vulnerable to this magic, although the spells are awkward to use. He says that demons do not disappear immediately after death, and so he decided to make them disappear in advance, not knowing where they might fall. The girl reflects on how the type of magic affects the nature of the magical power in the body, and clarifies. Keith agrees and says that the part related to understanding the nature of magic. The girl, holding out her hand, suggests going home. Keith agrees and also holds out his hand. They walk back into the room holding hands. Keith says she's glowing, and the girl smiles and says she's just as glowing. An elderly teacher with a mustache and beard hands a girl with long blonde hair the first order battle log she requested. The blonde girl thanks the teacher for the materials provided. The teacher says he will be in the staff room when she decides to return the books, and the girl replies that she understands. Keith meets a teacher named Balak, who greets him. The teacher says that he has already heard about the battle protocols, and Keith replies that he thought so. The teacher says with a smile that Miss Aristella came by recently. Keith asks Aristella's name again, surprised. The teacher explains that Aristella's father is a captain of the first squad named Edmund, and says that she, like her brothers, will most likely end up there too. Keith clarifies that she came for the first squad protocols, and the teacher confirms. The teacher calls it a common thing, but hints that there is something special in this case. Aristella sits alone at a table with books. The teacher talks about the girl who is studying the materials. He notes that although she received records of the First Division's victories and defeats, she only focused on the defeats. Keith watches her. The girl looks through the documents with a serious expression on her face, propping her face up with her hand. The exterior of the building is shown. The text states that Keith has arrived in the capital to report after carrying out Prince Alan's order to eliminate the wyverns. Keith stands in front of a man sitting at a table. The man says that Keith helped him by dealing with the wyverns, and clarifies that there were no problems. Keith inquires about the situation with the lack of people in the order. His interlocutor confirms this. The guy in the vest explains that the situation in the order has not changed since Keith left. The interlocutor at the table reports that the 11th Nightly Detachment has proposed increasing the number of soldiers and supplies. Keith suggests that there might be some kind of plan behind this. The guy with long blonde hair replies that he doesn't have all the information. He continues and says that there is no point in expecting action right now, as it is impossible to send aid to a unit on the front lines. Keith closes his eyes and answers. His interlocutor watches him. The blonde man turns his back to him and asks if he feels responsible for them. Keith answers negatively. Keith stands in different clothes. Someone off-screen tells him that he has something he needs to do. The blonde guy, sitting in the chair, says that he could not allow Captain Ven's dictatorship to continue while he was there. He suddenly remembers the completed investigation report. Behind the scenes, he is thanked for his efficiency and called by his name, Alan. In the background of the document, they discuss that a sage should have an advisor, and there is also a request not to use Alan everywhere and to convey gratitude to subordinates. Keith scratches his head and replies that everything happens for a reason. Alan says that if he has reasons, then he is not interested. He looks away and comments that the report was decent, noting Keith's teaching qualities. Keith asks not to say such things. The voiceover informs that there are no more visitors, and Keith can use the time as he wishes. He responds with gratitude. Keith stands with the papers and remembers that a few days ago he asked Alan to collect data on the losses of the first squad. Internal text states that the injury report can only be viewed in limited areas, unlike the combat report. Keith reads the documents and thinks that Alan has collected the information well. A report is displayed on the screen which contains data on combat operations, injuries, and causes of death. Keith looks at the diagram and is confident that the report contains the information he needs. He finds a record of a girl named Eleanor and learns that her hand was cut off. An image of two girls appears. One of them is Aristella, and the other is her older sister Eleanor. The students discuss the training. One of them thinks that the lesson after practice is too tough. Another student said he asked others, and only their group found the training particularly difficult. Keith notes that training is usually not that tough, especially without the point system, and adds that in normal times, beginners only use magic on targets. The girl with the pigtails says that she is worried about the 5 people who ended up in the medical room, and asks Aristella for her opinion. She stands silently nearby. The friend holds Aristella's hands and asks directly, "What happened, Aristella?" It is clear that she is worried. Keith turns around and answers briefly and uncertainly, "Oh no." The two girls continue their conversation as they walk down the hallway. Aristella, smiling slightly, says that she was simply thinking about the importance of the tournament. Keith says Aristella's name as if he is about to say something or remind her of something. The teacher says they have something important to discuss and asks if she remembers how to get to his lab. Aristella's friend, holding her hand, replies, "Yes, I remember." Keith, with a slight smile, says that he will come after class then. Aristella and her friend leave, thinking that they won't be able to talk here. He says that he will check the others in the medical room and that they should change and return to class, and turns his back to them and walks towards the doors. Already in the medical office, one of the students tells Keith that 5 students were hospitalized today. She looks serious and even a little angry. The ponytailed student furiously says that it's sarcasm. Keith calmly replies that he knows. The other student is perplexed. "What was I talking about?" The girl with 2 tails holds her hand near her face and compares the injuries she received with the previous ones, concluding that this time they are more serious. Keith turns his head to the side and inquires about the state of the situation, trying to find out if everything will be okay. Keith and the girl sit opposite each other. He clarifies the number of students who have chosen the second hour of practice. The girl confirms that there are not many. Keith stands and explains that he usually uses the second hour to review material, and if students don't choose it, then there is no problem. The girl silently looks forward. Then a curtained ward is shown with a sign stating that all beds are occupied. The girl sums up what is happening. The woman in the robe and Keith are in the office. She addresses him by name, standing at the desk where he sits. She asks why this is happening. Keith replies that everything is temporary. Keith looks at the girl and explains that for students who want to become stronger, he has a way to increase their strength, but he is unsure whether to use it due to the possible danger. The girl initially agrees, then says that the degree of risk is not yet clear and much depends on the circumstances. She reminds that Keith himself said so earlier. Aristella stands with her back to him, thinking that everything depends on what a person wants himself. Keith, sitting at the table, confirms the decision made by bowing his head. The girl is surprised, assuming that she has been drawn into something terrible. Keith explains with a slight smile that she was already involved in what was happening from the very beginning. The girl is confused and realizes that she has become a participant in the events without knowing it, and Keith continues to talk. The girl turns around slightly, looking worried when Keith tells her that he can count on her if there are any problems. Keith speaks to the girl with a serious expression, and she, smiling shyly, admits that he is still not the best role model. Keith starts a conversation and asks about memories associated with Eleanor Granless. The girl suddenly becomes wary. The girl replies that she has not personally communicated with Eleanor, but has often heard her name since they studied at the same academy. Keith is interested in her personality. The girl says that Eleanor was beautiful and had a gentle character, dreamed of becoming a knight and helping people, trying to live up to the image of a noblewoman. At the same time, she was softer than Aristella. Keith takes in what he's heard in silence, looking away as if he's thinking about the story. Keith sits at the table alone, reflecting on how the two sisters' personalities are not so different. 2 girls are shown, Eleanor and Aristella. The author emphasizes the external and internal similarities between them, concluding that Eleanor could be a suitable target for comparison. Keith watches his interlocutor as she apparently confirms her own suspicions while standing nearby. The character in the robe informs him that their conversation is indeed about Aristella, which Keith confirms, showing surprise. A scene is shown of Aristella walking down a dangerous path surrounded by thorns. The voiceover suggests that despite the awareness of the danger, one could only try to push her away from this choice. Keith looks away. In his thoughts, he hears the phrase that no one can hinder a person with a strong will. The girl looks down, thinking that she always did this. Afterwards, he left thinking that, since he had checked the student's condition, he needed to return to class. Before leaving, he turned around and told Acris that he was entrusting the care of the students to her, addressing her as Nurse Acris. Nurse Acris smiles happily and enthusiastically, says that she will take it upon herself, raising her fists as she does so. Keith stands in the room and tells the newcomer to come through. A voice is heard off-screen calling him teacher and calling his name Aristella. Aristella is sitting on the couch, and she asks Keith what he wanted to talk about. The guy tells Aristella about a weak point he noticed in her during training. Aristella listens attentively and is surprised by the words about weakness. Aristella sits quietly and listens as the boy remarks that she has outstanding abilities compared to other students. Keith adds that there is one moment that particularly stands out. The guy calls Aristella by name and asks her what she is so afraid of. Aristella sits on the couch with a tense expression on her face. The boy and Aristella stand opposite each other. He asks her again about the reason for her fear. Aristella reacts sharply, gesturing with her hand and exclaiming that she is not afraid of anything at all, and that she is from the fearless Grandis family. The guy, slightly embarrassed, explains that that's not what he meant. The boy explains that the fact that the Grandis family is famous for its fearlessness has nothing to do with Aristella. Aristella responds with fury by claiming that she is one of the Grandis family. Keith calmly asks Aristella about her command during today's training. The battle is shown in scenes where it is said that everything was fine, while the goal was to suppress the enemy, but then Aristella could not make a decision. And because of this, the opponents regain their strength and turn the tide of the battle. Aristella clenches her fist and remains tensely silent. The guy says that the victory was achieved thanks to her personal abilities. He notes that she would be fearless on her own, but becomes indecisive when leading a team. He asks Aristella if she is afraid. He asks if she is afraid that someone will suffer because of her. He remembers how she was captured during training and would have chosen death if she had been in that situation. He explains that such words indicate her willingness to suffer personally, but this does not mean that she is fearless. He adds that choosing death is a way to escape fear, not an act of courage. He connects her fear with her older sister's injury. Aristella wonders how he knows this. The guy explains that he found a document about her family and tried to figure it out. He says that if she has something to say, it is better to speak out now. Aristella is silent, her eyes downcast, and then slowly looks up. Aristella says that her sister Eleanor is special to her. She remembers how Eleanor, loving her more than anyone, was always there. Eleanor was the ideal she aspired to, gentle, noble, and beautiful. Aristella recalls being struck dumb with horror when she saw her sister with her hand cut off. She admits that she can't handle either the demons or the battle. She wanted to become like her sister, no matter what. Aristella cries out in despair that she cannot accept this. I remember how my father, a captain in a knightly order, renounced his feelings and went into battle. Aristella says that she will not become like her father. The guy guesses that this is why she studies the acts of the knightly order, and Aristella confirms this. Aristella says that she found no errors in the report, although perhaps she simply doesn't know something. She notes that neither her father, nor the leader, nor the other captains made any obvious mistakes. The guy replies that her father is an outstanding man who put people first, and perhaps he made the best choice then. Aristella cannot bear it and asks in despair, if everything was right, why? She doesn't understand why Eleanor experienced tragedy and now lives with such trauma. The guy says that this is the essence of the topic. Demons are stronger and humans are weak. He explains that even if he follows the right path, losses cannot be avoided, and he himself cannot change this. He adds, even with the right decisions, people die because humanity is weak and demons are strong. Aristella is silent, then begins, She asks if, as captain, he could have prevented the losses that happened a few months ago. Aristella remembers a loss that happened a few months ago, a battle where the knights retreated and Eleanor lost her arm. The teacher admits that he has no talent for leadership, and his knowledge of tactics is only at a basic academic level. He adds that even if he had saved Eleanor, the tragedy would still have happened, only in a different form. Aristella says she doesn't want to hurt anyone when she addresses the teacher. She asks him if her wish is wrong. The teacher notices that she confuses wishes with reality. Then he says that he will not reject her desire if it is so important to her. He continues, "A simple wish is not enough to make it come true." Aristella agrees, adding that the dream will only come true if you take action, otherwise nothing will work. She admits that it is difficult to fulfill a wish because even with effort she does not understand what is the best way to act. Aristella says out loud that she has come to a certain thought, expressing her inner determination. The girl thinks about a possible mistake. Even if she trained a lot, if she makes the wrong choice, someone could get hurt. She admits that this is what worries her. Aristella sits with her hands clasped, admitting that such thoughts may be stupid, but she still can't get rid of them. The teacher, looking seriously, expresses the opinion that the people around Eleanor expected perfection from her. Aristella asks the teacher a direct question. What should she do to make her wish come true? The teacher, with his eyes closed and a calm expression on his face, answers that mistakes and blunders happen to everyone, starting his answer with this. Aristella stands and looks attentively at the teacher, saying that she wants to hear only one thing. The teacher gives advice. Take the first step, without fear of making a mistake, encouraging her to act. He continues, "The first step may be difficult, and losing is possible, but without changing anything, there will be no result." Aristella listens to him, while he confidently says that there is nothing to fear. Aristella sits opposite the teacher and quietly says, "Without fear of making a mistake." She wonders why he says this so easily, looking at him with a confused expression. Aristella begins to smile. The teacher remembers how she used to say she wanted to become stronger when she was lying in the infirmary. Aristella looks straight ahead, her hesitation seemingly disappearing. The teacher, sitting on the couch, asks what she will do if there is a way to become stronger. He warns that suffering awaits her. Aristella confidently answers that she will use this method. The teacher opens a box with some kind of device inside and tells Aristella to use it. She asks what it is. It explains that in order to transform multiple attribute magic, it is necessary to master a new type of transformation. He points out that the ability to transform a magic element into a specific attribute is inherent in the human body by nature, as mentioned in the lesson. Keith explains the rare cases where people try to forcefully combine magic of different attributes with the wrong magic power. He notes that due to the zero efficiency factor, such a method has no effect. Keith asks Aristella if she remembers the types of magical powers, to which she gives a short affirmative answer of AA. The 4 known types of magic powers are listed: fire, ignis, air, anima, water, aqua, and earth, solm. Keith confirms that there are currently 4 known types of magic. Keith notes that Aristella was good at wind magic from birth, but after a few years she was able to master the water element. He concludes that by the time she entered the academy, she already had mastered 2 magical attributes. She agrees, saying that Keith is right. Keith says she quickly realized this. Aristella replies that he is a teacher after all. Keith explains that it is now possible to transform aqua. He adds that in other words, in her case, she can transform power into anima. Aristella says yes, with a questioning look. It is said that if one element is changed artificially, the effects will be different and harmful to the body. Keith tells Aristella that this tool will cause harmful effects unless it is addressed to a bearer of a dual attribute or more, like her. He explains that if a person can transform 2 elements into magic, the body does not need other elements. The girl asks if she will use the instrument alone. They confirm. She asks if it has been used before. The answer is yes. The girl says the tool is dangerous. Keith agrees with the statement, but notes that the risk is balanced by the reward. Keith announces that from now on, Aristella will become a rare possessor of 3 types of magic. He suggests the possibility of her body adapting to the element of fire, ignis. It is mentioned that such magicians are found among knightly orders and possess the highest abilities. At the end, the question is asked, how to become one? Aristella is surprised, saying that she has never heard of such a method. She adds that she has heard that the only way to possess the three elements is through constant effort by those who have exceptional talent for it. The teacher says that this statement is one-sided. Keith wonders if she thinks there is only one right way. The guy says that the barrier, the balance of magical power that was damaged, may be weaker than it is now. He also adds that if you can't withstand the ring and give in, Keith and Aristella sit opposite each other. Keith says that to remain calm and strong means to be in danger. Keith explains that if she puts in the effort, she will be able to master 3 types of magic in 10 years. Aristella is surprised to hear about 10 years. Keith continues, adding that if Aristella masters 3 types of magic, it will be a record. He specifies that she is currently 15 years old, and a 25-year-old knight is still young. The internal monologue shows that the current Aristella will graduate from the academy and become a knight. However, she does not think she will live to see this time. Keith asks if Aristella is willing to become stronger, despite the risk of ruining her future. The girl looks at him silently. Aristella puts her hand on her chest and says firmly that she will use it. Keith closes his eyes, then opens them, looking at her in surprise. Keith ponders the ring. He thinks there are many ways to survive without using the ring. He thinks Aristella should understand this. Keith looks at Aristella in profile and thinks that everything is upside down for her. Aristella is confused. Flashback. Aristella in a hospital room. Keith watches her. He remembers how she was afraid of hurting others and concludes that she is prone to self-sacrifice. Silhouettes of other characters appear. In the center is Aristella. A thought sounds off-screen. Her will is too strong. She does not stop, even when she does not understand the goal. Keith notes to himself how similar she is to them. The girl opens the box with the magic item. Aristella takes the item in front of her and concentrates. After the magic is activated, Aristella suddenly screams and clutches her throat. She feels a strong burning sensation. Her face is distorted with pain. Keith is alarmed and approaches, asking a question. Aristella continues to scream and writhe in pain. Keith runs up to her, trying to hold her back to stop the attack. Keith hugs Aristella and tells her to take a deep breath, trying to calm her down. Aristella breathes heavily, gradually coming to her senses. She says that she already feels better. Keith stands next to her and confirms that everything is fine. Keith warns Aristella that her concentration has decreased and that fatigue will persist, so she needs to be careful. Aristella replies that she understands. Aristella silently touches her hair, looking thoughtful. Aristella looks at Keith and says that he is very strong. Keith turns around, surprised. Keith simply replies that although he was expelled from the order, he was a knight and was as strong as his students. Aristella explains that this is not what she meant. Aristella shrugs it off, embarrassed, and asks him to forget her words, thinking to herself that she is saying something strange. The teacher turns when Aristella addresses him. She asks how long the instrument should be worn, and he replies that she should have asked before using it. The teacher admits that he himself does not know the exact answer. Aristella muses out loud. Use can take anywhere from days to months and affects everyone differently. The teacher adds that no one took off the instrument in the middle of wearing it, as this could have a negative effect. Aristella thinks that if she can last a month, she will be ready for any tournament. She is afraid that because of her selfishness, she might create problems for the whole class. Having decided that she needs to take action, she confidently thinks that she will solve any problems before the tournament. Aristella says with a smile that she will go through this painful path because it will not be in vain, and declares that she understood the teacher. Keith says that if Aristella shows the result, he will not reproach her. When she asks if she can go to bed, he confirms that the conversation is over. Keith closes the box and says goodbye. He notes internally that the real test is just beginning. Aristella leaves, full of determination. The next day comes. Aristella holds her hand on her chest, thinking about the ring she received from Keith. She feels something stirring anxiously inside, although it is not outwardly noticeable. Someone from the room asks if Aristella is going to the academy. She is confused, not noticing how time has flown. In class, the teacher calls Aristella to the board to explain the question. Aristella stands up abruptly. Her name is called. Her classmates are surprised. The teacher notices her unbalanced state and advises her to go to the medical center if she feels unwell. Aristella, although feeling strange, refuses and apologizes. She did not notice how she fell out of reality. Approaching the board, she first tries to solve the problem, but looking at the class and the board, she realizes that she cannot apply the right method to the question. Aristella stands at the board and looks tense. She knows the answer, but she can't concentrate and wonders why she can't concentrate. The teacher notices that Aristella took too long to answer, although she should have answered without hesitation, and the girl apologizes. The teacher acknowledges the correctness of the answer and says that there is no need to apologize. He allows Aristella to return to her place, but when she walks, she suddenly loses her balance. Aristella falls to the floor in the middle of the classroom. The teacher and students are shocked by what happened. The teacher is concerned about Aristella's condition and suggests going to the medical office. The girl replies that she wants to stay in class for now and will do so when she feels worse. Aristella sits at her desk and looks depressed. She mentally admits that her body has been acting up since the evening and she feels weak. The students discuss the situation. One of them says that Aristella fell like fairy, and her friend sharply objects, saying that this does not always happen to her. Aristella asks everyone to be quiet, reminding them that class is in session, and smiles, trying to stay calm. She watches the pen lying on the table and thinks how difficult it is to even reach out and pick it up. It's as if her body refuses to obey. In her mind, Aristella remembers Keith's words about walking through hell, and begins to realize how hard it is to be unable to control her body. What used to be natural has now become impossible. Keith explains that magic and the human body are closely connected. An imbalance in magical power can affect the physical condition, and vice versa. Physical weakness affects magic. He continues that when an alien magical force is artificially introduced into the body, it causes many problems and feels foreign. He ends his explanation with the words, "something like that." And the girl sitting in front of him lowers her head in embarrassment. She says she understands everything but clearly feels awkward and tense. Keith remarks that he wanted to share the information with his only ally. The girl annoyedly replies that she is busy and does not understand why he is telling her all this. She says that the main thing is that Aristella does not take off the necklace. Even if Aristella feels ill, there is no need to worry. Keith reminds her that she used to want to help the clumsy. He wonders why she's so upset, since she's supposed to like people like that. The girl replies that she doesn't understand since when she became his ally. Keith asks if she is showing affection. She denies it. Then she admits that she likes Aristella and becomes thoughtful. She says something is still weird. Keith asks what it is. He asks directly, "Are you so interested in Aristella?" and looks at her carefully. Keith says there's nothing special about it. The girl reminds him that he made the necklace for Aristella himself. Keith agrees in response. Keith explains that he designed the necklace in advance, so it didn't take long. The girl wonders if he's a people pleaser. The girl notices that Keith has changed since he arrived at the academy. Keith says hesitantly that he doesn't think such changes are possible. The girl insists that he has really changed and become softer. Keith doubts it, saying that softer sounds unrealistic. The girl adds that despite his progress, he is still inconsiderate of others. Keith, laughing, agrees. The girl notes with a smile that although he has no experience, he remains just as impudent. Keith, looking at her with half-closed eyes, calmly says that this concerns her too. As he is about to leave, the girl notices that he has suddenly become very polite, which surprises her. Keith apologizes for the distraction and leaves. Keith leaves the classroom, saying that he is not going to discipline Aristella forever. The girl smiles, and then mentally stops, realizing that she is happy about his not entirely kind behavior. Aristella returns to the dorm, noting to herself that the week has been hellish. She begins to realize the limits of her abilities, and admits that she is still completely helpless in magic. Sitting in the room, Aristella reflects on how she feels like the weakest in the class. The general discussion about how all the students at the academy are strong enough, albeit with different abilities, comes up. Remembering Fairy, Bellamy, and Graham, Aristella is saddened by the fact that she does not have the skills that others have, and wonders what she is even capable of if she were to face a real opponent. The girl reflects that as circumstances change, the plan of action must also change. However, compared to other students, she realizes that even in the best of times, she would not be able to compete with them. The answer is no. A new week begins. Keith gathers the students, saying that he will now call out names and they must gather. Celica notices that Aristella and Edge are back on her team and expresses her displeasure at what she feels is an unfair division of the members. She is displeased at being grouped with Fairy and Lanai again, while Fairy, Lina, and Edge calmly exchange words, hoping for a coordinated teamwork. Their opponents are mentioned to have a high percentage of victories. Fari, Semka, and Mina are considered strong fighters, but they are not considered to be among the best. Edge is presented as an average student with no notable strengths or weaknesses. She thinks that normally she could count on her fencing, but right now her form is not up to par. She worries about whether they will be able to successfully cope with strong opponents. The girl ponders the motives of the teacher who deliberately assigned the participants in this way. She feels that it was done with a specific purpose, and she tries to understand what exactly he expects. Graham and Belcom give the go-ahead, officially announcing the start of the match. The opponents go on the offensive from the first seconds, unleashing an intense battle. It is mentioned that Ymir's team, led by Razd, will also take part in the first round. One of the participants notices the high speed of the opponent's actions and recalls the long-standing rivalry between their families. A commercial break is announced, temporarily interrupting the progress of the match. The teacher observes what is happening in the arena and notices that, despite knowing each other well, the participants cannot achieve victory. This awakens in him an interest in the further course of the fight. Keith approaches Aristella, asking how she is feeling, amidst discussions about a certain gap in the defense. Keith concludes that such difficulties are valuable combat experience that can only be gained through attempts to independently cope with unexpected situations on the battlefield. Inwardly, the girl notes with discontent, "You could have said it better somehow." The teacher informs them that their opponent is Kane's team. Aristella thinks she knew it. Aristella notes that the enemy will go all out, and considers this to be an expected decision. She concludes that with their current composition, the team is vulnerable only because of the enemy they have chosen. Keith, hearing her thoughts, asks if she had guessed this in advance. Kane stands with his head turned to the left. It is noted that he has the best physical indicators in the class, and his strength and speed are on par with the knights, also that he is larger than the others, and noticeably taller than all the other guys. Aristella ponders Kane's strengths. She concludes that despite his weak mastery of elemental magic, he is good at enhancing his physical parameters, and will immediately try to enhance his body in battle. Keith watches Aristella and notes that their team has a good chance of winning, though she remains focused. She calmly confirms this. Aristella looks into the distance with a concentrated look, as if trying to predict the course of events. Keith notices her behavior and notes to himself that she is acting differently today. Keith notices something strange about what is happening. Aristella, standing next to him, asks what exactly has confused him. Aristella stands with a serious expression. Even though she lost her previous fighting form after putting on the necklace, she does not lose her determination and continues to hold on. Aristella admits that it was difficult for her to accept what was happening and continue living as usual. She often felt disappointed in herself, but over time she came to an important realization. Her reflections are linked to the experiences of her sister Eleanor, which gives her thoughts a personal depth. "I remember the story of Zabanora, who lost her arm in a fight with a demon, but managed to undergo rehabilitation and return to battle. This leads to the conclusion that even helplessness is not a reason to stop, and this is exactly what reflects the essence of Aristella. It is emphasized that the most important thing is to move forward. For Aristella, the most important thing is not whether her wish will come true, but that she wants to take the pain on herself so that no one else will suffer. Olna also reflects that this decision can be dangerous and even deadly risky. At the same time, it is emphasized that it is this choice that can lead to new opportunities and change her path. Keith is nearby, pondering what he, as a teacher, should do to guide Aristella. There is a powerful explosion or impact, raising clouds of dust and scattering debris. The outline of a stone wall can be seen in the background, indicating the scale of the destruction. The results of the previous match are summed up. Richui's team wins, and Ymir's team is unable to continue the fight. The spectators and participants are informed that the next team can enter the arena as soon as they are ready. The discussion of the upcoming fight begins, with Aristella's team taking center stage. It is noted that in team battles this group finds ways to victory. All team members gather near Aristella. The opinion is voiced that she is the only one to be afraid of, but they do not have time to finish the thought. Keith looks away, remembering that Aristella had looked unwell last week. Aristella accepts the offer and asks if the rest of the team agrees. One of the participants is surprised by her choice, not expecting such a step from her. The other confidently declares that this decision will help them win. One of the team members tells her that, since she has decided so, they will do everything. The team members discuss the current situation and notice that prolonged inactivity may alert the opponent. One of them assures the others that this is part of the intended tactic, while another notes that the tension makes them look like they are preparing for something suspicious. Aristella, full of determination, urges the team to move forward and put the plan into action in order to win. Team Aristella and Team Kane stand opposite each other, tension simmering between them. The atmosphere becomes tense, creating the feeling of an approaching, intense battle. One of the observers notices that the atmosphere has become tense. Keith puts his hand forward and signals that the battle is about to begin. Nearby, one of the team members with tousled hair enthusiastically announces the beginning of the battle. The team launches a frontal assault. The characters are confused as to which of the attackers should be stopped first. Aristella rushes forward, swinging her sword. At this moment, Kane shouts that Aristella needs to be stopped. Aristella and Kane fight furiously, exchanging blows with swords. Their movements are swift, their blows are powerful. Kane attacks, but Aristella manages to dodge. Her teammate gives the signal, and Kane reacts with surprise to what is happening. Celica and her ally unleash fire attacks on Kane, trapping him. Kane, attempting to dodge, is caught in a barrage of flames and falls, while his ally watches in horror. One of Kane's team members watches in shock as the battlefield unfolds. Kane, clutching his sword, loudly calls for his ally to help. Sia, shielding herself from the sandy dust, tries to understand what is happening behind her. One of Kane's team members asks Keith about the real goal. The remaining enemy assesses the situation and realizes that he has to fight against two. He hopes to keep Aristella at a distance, considering this his chance for success. Edge suddenly appears from behind and knocks down one of the opponents. The latter looks around in panic, but it is too late. The attack is swift. The opponents are lost due to the dust that has risen. Aristella's team takes advantage of the moment and forces a fight. One of the opponents cannot move and falls into a trap. Kane suddenly appears behind enemy lines, attacking the girl with a sword. Her comrade is shocked by Kane's sudden appearance. While one of the girls realizes that Aristella was right, the other tries to use magic, but doesn't have time. One of the allies shouts at her to be careful. Kane's team is once again in trouble, with dust blocking their vision, and at that moment, two members of Aristella's team attack from the flanks, catching them off guard. The young man noted that Klaus had been defeated. I became alarmed and asked to strengthen him and Saya. The girl said that the strengthening of two opponents at once would hardly last long, and the effect would soon weaken. He explained that this would be enough to quickly deal with Lena and the others. The girl assumed that soon someone from the rear guard would go into battle. It is at this moment that they will begin their offensive. One of the heroines tells Celica to lift the curtain over the rear guard. Celica, in response to the command, confirms that she understands and begins to use magic, while another character, armed with a sword, also prepares to act. Girls holding in their hands swords, reacting with alarm to what has happened. They have clearly been caught off guard. One of them turns sharply to assess the situation. The other clutches her sword, ready to defend herself. One of them reports that Kane's team has been defeated. Upon hearing this news, the other fighters look surprised and wary. One of the students noted with admiration that Eerie and Tella had won in less than a minute. The other students began to argue about the reasons for their success, with some believing that it was due to Celica's magic, while others claimed that it was because Edge had defeated Kane. At that point, someone reminded them that the entire plan had been devised by Eerie and Tella. One of the characters asked Bellamy to comment on their tactics. He explained that Aristella's team separated the opponents and did not allow them to gather together, thanks to which they were able to attack one by one and win without much effort. The second interlocutor confirmed his words, agreeing that it was the numerical pressure and a well-constructed plan that ensured victory. At this time, the team itself stands together, clearly pleased with the result of the battle. One of the heroes gave the order to the next group of participants to get ready and ordered the injured to be sent to the medical center. He noted that he was surprised that one of the participants was able to completely figure out Kane's tactics. To this, the girl calmly replied that there was nothing special about it. That's just all she can do right now. The heroine thought that her only skill was to find a way to win, and that was all she could do. She told herself that she had to do it. Even though she didn't want to admit it, deep down she felt proud. Meanwhile, the young man reasoned that she had always had many options available to her, which made it difficult to make the right choice. He also noted that she had almost never failed, so she had no experience to help her in further reflection. The girl admitted that the interlocutor was the first to give her a chance, for which she was grateful. The young man laughed in response and said ironically that he was probably her spiritual mentor. She immediately objected that this was not true at all. However, she added that she was still a little upset about that day, hinting at some important event in her past. The young man asked the girl in surprise if she was still upset. She confirmed with a slight smile that, yes, a little. The characters discussed their upcoming joint activities. One of them reminded that the lecture this time would be given by Teacher Kate. Another confirmed this and added that he had heard that Teacher Kate was favored by Mrs. Mary. At the same time, they noticed that many students were not yet familiar with the new teacher, as he had arrived late. One of the participants in the conversation expressed curiosity about what kind of person this teacher is and how he conducts classes. One of the teachers asked his interlocutor whether he knew the teacher who was to give the next lecture. He replied that the teacher had been his student and had always studied diligently. He added that he was now eager to see what his former student could teach children as a teacher. The teacher also noted that he had always been strict with himself and cared about those around him. Her interlocutor responded to this with a smile, expressing surprise. One of the teachers said that Keith had always been a sincere and straightforward person, and expressed confidence that he had not changed. He hoped that Keith would be able to please the students. Meanwhile, students began to gather in the auditorium, waiting for the lecture to begin. Among them were those who watched with interest what was happening, anticipating what the new teacher would be like. The students discussed the lecture being given by Kate's teacher. One of them noted that most of the students were tense, which was understandable. Another added that Keith was often called a strict teacher. Some agreed with this opinion, suggesting that this was indeed like him. Soon one of the students asked the class to be quieter, as everything was about to start. A young man, probably a teacher preparing for a lecture, approached the stage of a large auditorium. A teacher named Keith stood before the students in a large auditorium and announced that he would be the one giving the lecture today. He explained that he had only recently arrived at the academy, so he had not had the chance to introduce himself before. He also noted that he had served as a knight on the front lines until last month. Then he turned on the projector and announced that the lecture was about to begin. The topic of the lecture was announced to be the battle of mankind with demons. The students listened to him with interest. Teacher Keith continued his lecture, telling the students that he would be speaking about the current state of the order and its future prospects. He noted that there was a perception that humans were successfully defeating monsters in battle, but in reality, things were different. According to him, if you look at the information from the last 10 years, you can see that humans are gradually losing their lands. He showed the map where it was evident that many villages and towns had virtually disappeared, especially in the northeastern regions of Altera, Zagre, and Hekrema. The teacher stressed that the situation was becoming increasingly critical and called for this to be kept in mind. During the lecture, the teacher told the students about the Seyo Reis region, which was formerly located to the west of the Magnolia region. He said that this region had fallen to monsters 15 years ago. The teacher's words were accompanied by an image of a destroyed city and a huge monster on the screen, causing surprise and concern among the students in the audience. Someone in the room remarked that no other teacher would have dared to say such words, and added that this really sounded like Keith's teacher. He cautioned that he would not go into detail about each battle, as students would learn about that in military history classes. However, he stressed that humanity is in dire straits. The teacher told the students that they had come to the academy to become knights and would spend 3 years here, and many of them will die in battles within a few years. The teacher told the students that death would not bring them honor. They would simply die. He added that he wanted them to learn this at the academy and learn how to survive. One of the students agreed with him, admitting that he was telling the truth. He explained that he was going to show them casualty reports from battles, since combat documents were hard to come by. The students discussed the teacher's words. One of them confirmed that he had indeed said that many of them would die in battle in a few years. Another noted that it was quite harsh. One of the students suggested that Teacher Keith wanted to warn not only them, but also the rest of the academy's students about what awaited them in the future. The dark-haired girl added that he did this so that they would not die in battle. The students walked down the corridor and remembered the words of the teacher, who said that death would not bring them honor, they would simply die. One of the students noticed that this teacher, the only one who so openly questions all the foundations of the Night Academy. The students were discussing the recent statement made by Keith's teacher. One of them remarked that even he was surprised by what he heard. Another added that if the House of Lords found out about it, the teacher could be fired because he was allegedly unfit to teach at the academy. However, despite the controversial statements, everyone agreed that Keith was an excellent teacher. They noted that his explanations were surprisingly clear. In the end, they decided that they had to give it their all. One of the students confidently stated that everything will be fine, trying to cheer up the others. The guys walked along the corridor of the academy, and her words made many smile. Despite the tense atmosphere, her optimism cheered everyone up a little. Chairwoman Selena praised Teacher Keith for his work, noting that he did an excellent job. Teacher Kit politely asked her if she had come to the lecture. She replied that this day was important to him, and she could not miss it. In response to his question about whether she represents the administration, Selena confirmed that she does indeed speak on behalf of the elders. One of the teachers expressed the opinion that Teacher Keith showed the students the harsh reality too abruptly, which could cause them stress. It was also said that some teachers were worried about his words. In turn, Selena admitted that thanks to his actions, she was able to see again how serious the situation at the academy is. Selena addressed Keith, saying that being in a high position, it was difficult to see what was going on inside the academy. She explained that she did not think his methods were bad, but teaching him such things early on could be dangerous. She also admitted that she had invited him to the academy with the intention of changing the situation. Selena thanked Keith for his lecture, adding that she was sure that not only the students had learned something important from it. She noted that thanks to him, the situation at the academy had improved a little. Keith admitted that he didn't think he had done anything significant yet. Selena just smiled and said she was looking forward to seeing what he had to say. Keith explained to his students that it would be better to do something in a certain way, offering them a more effective solution. One of the girls muttered in shock that she couldn't believe it. The teacher admitted that he had been very busy since arriving at the academy. One of the students noted that he had indeed been constantly busy with something lately. The student asked him what he was doing when he saw him writing. The teacher explained that he was making a list of students by analyzing their strengths and weaknesses, studying their pedigrees, and drawing certain conclusions. Upon hearing this, one of the students exclaimed that they understood everything and that there was enough information, otherwise they would get a headache. The students discussed how their teacher had become really busy lately. One of the girls remarked that she thought he had a lot of free time, but later realized that students from other groups often came to him for advice. Then one of the students asked what he was working on now. To this he replied that it was a secret, adding that even if he told them, they still wouldn't understand yet. His answer caused slight confusion among everyone. The students decided that perhaps they were disturbing the teacher and expressed this out loud. However, he suggested that if they really felt that way, why don't they go back to the dorm and study? One of the students noted that it was very spacious and comfortable here, and that they did not want to leave. The girl added that it would be ideal if they also brought them tea. The teacher, in turn, tried to bring them back to the point by calling out to them. The students noticed that the teacher never told them directly that they had to leave. One of them added that he felt like a nobody since they were ignored. The teacher responded calmly that he simply wasn't paying much attention to them. The girl admitted that she hadn't meant that and that such a reaction was too harsh. One of the students wondered if he should interrupt them a little, but another joked that if they touched the table with anything, everything would explode. One of the students noticed that someone had come and assumed that perhaps it was someone else who had come to consult with the teacher. The girl volunteered to check who it was and headed for the door. The others watched what was happening, and someone noted to themselves that she had come. One of the girls opened the door to see who had arrived. The other students were watching from afar. When she saw the guest, she asked in surprise who she was. At this time, the other students were watching the situation with interest, and one of them looked especially wary, trying to figure out who was in front of them. The student opened the door and noticed that Luca Rivet had entered the room. Hearing this, the other students realized who they had just seen and looked at each other in surprise. The students noticed that she is the best student of the academy. Third-year student Luca Rivet came to consult with Teacher Keith. Teacher Kate calmly confirmed the information and told everyone else to return to the dorm. Kate's teacher asked Luca what she wanted to talk about. Luca was silent for a moment, then said that in the lecture he had mentioned that death did not bring honor to a knight, and she wanted to clarify if this was true. Luca asked the teacher to retract her earlier words. In response, he called her purist and categorically refused to change his mind. After that, he asked her a counter-question with a slight smile. What is she going to do if he still doesn't go back on his word? After the teacher refused to take his words back, the girl, barely containing her emotions, resolutely declared that then she would have to force him to retract them. Several students were discussing the new teacher, saying that he had declared in front of the entire first year that dying on the battlefield did not bring honor. One of them suggested that he probably became a teacher out of fear of death, as he used to be a knight. This caused ridicule among the students, and one of the students listened silently to their conversation. One of the students asked Luca what she thought of the new teacher. The girl coldly replied that she was not interested in the delusions of narrow-minded people, and added that she doesn't think anything about it. One of the students noted to himself that Luca always tries to appear calm and collected, but in reality, in his opinion, she is just a fool. He was surprised that she was actually angry. At this point, the narrator explained that Luca Rivette was a girl from a noble family that was going through hard times, and she dreamed of becoming a knight to restore the honor of her family. One of the students reflected on Luca's reaction to Keith's words. He thought that when Keith said that there was no honor in dying on the battlefield, it was a serious blow to Luca, who had dedicated her life to the idea of honor. Luca was surprised by her classmate's reaction and asked if she had said anything strange. They quickly assured her that everything was fine. After that, she calmly said that she had things to do and decided to leave, leaving the others slightly perplexed. The students noticed that Luca left upset and were surprised by her reaction. One of them noted that he had never seen her so angry before. Others suggested that she was hurt by the teacher's words, which wounded her knightly pride. Everyone came to the conclusion that Luca takes her aspirations to become a knight especially seriously, because no one tries as hard in this matter as she does. Teacher looking at the girl, he asked if she really wanted him to take back his words. Then he suggested that she was challenging him to a duel. The girl looked at him with determination, not saying a word, but her gaze spoke for itself. Inside, he felt a strong tension, although outwardly she tried to remain calm. Luca firmly stated that she was challenging her interlocutor to a duel, confirming his guess. Inwardly, she was thinking that perhaps the reason for her persistence and desire to win was hidden in something much deeper. The young man agreed to the girl's proposal and said that he would apply for the use of the training ground, so that they could figure everything out there. He added that if she won, he would take his words back. The teacher asked if she would be okay with such a condition. She reminded him to keep his promise. To this, he replied that everything was decided. The girl wondered why the teacher was so accommodating. After their conversation, she said she would wait for him at the training ground. He briefly agreed. Inside, the girl was confident in her victory, and thought with satisfaction about what his expression would be like when she won. He thought that since this was a training match, all the students would fight not just with words. Luca Rivette would definitely come with a sword, because he heard that she was a skilled swordswoman, so he decided that he should also show his skills. The girl asked in surprise whether he had dressed like that on purpose to provoke her. He ignored her words, thinking that he had heard something similar before. Instead, he asked her to consider whether he, a former knight, had any chance of winning. The girl remarked that since he was a knight, he should be stronger than the student. He agreed with this. At this time, someone recalled that she was now a third-year student, and her skills had increased significantly. He admitted that it was no exaggeration to say that she was now capable of defeating a knight. It was also mentioned that in her second year, Luca had already participated in a training duel with a graduating knight, and throughout the entire fight, the advantage was on her side. The girl asked if they were ready to begin the duel. After a brief glance with her opponent, she activated her ability, loudly pronouncing the name of the move, Braveheart. At that moment, energy flared around her, emphasizing her determination and strength. Meanwhile, he was thinking about her magic. Everything from the release of power to the activation of the magic formula was executed flawlessly. The girl was surprised that the guy decided to fight her with swords, knowing how strong she was at it. In response to the challenge, the girl resolutely said that she would follow his rules. Luca rushes forward, full of determination, sword at the ready. Her expression is focused and combative. The guy, in turn, stands in a stance, carefully watching her movements, and remains completely calm. He is clearly confident and ready to strike. During the fight, the girl rushed at her opponent with a scream, attacking him from above. She put all her determination and strength into the blow. The guy watched her carefully and noted with slight surprise that her skill and level of combat were not at all consistent with an ordinary student. At that moment, he took a confident step forward, preparing for the next move. The girl noticed that her blow was easily blocked and mentally acknowledged that the fight could not be dragged out any longer. A determination appeared in her gaze, and she realized that it was time to move on to decisive action. Meanwhile, the boy, carefully watching her movements, remained focused. Their swords clashed with force again, and the tension between them only increased. Their gazes met, and the tension in the air increased. However, despite all her determination, the girl suddenly felt something was wrong. Her wariness was reflected on her face. She thought that everything that was happening seemed strange. The girl watched her opponent warily, thinking about the course of the fight. It seemed to her that the guy was reading her movements. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was simply moving the sword exactly where she was going to strike. She was confused by the fact that his defense was reacting in advance rather than responding to her attacks. All of this made her uneasy, and she began to doubt her own strength and wonder if he was really capable of predicting her every move. The girl stood tensely in front of her opponent, pondering what was happening. She was sure that his reaction was too precise to be a simple guess. It seemed to her as if he was actually able to see through her movements. Despite all her attempts to understand his actions, she still couldn't figure out how he did it. Confusion was visible in her eyes, but despite this, she was ready to continue the fight. Luca thought that if he really could read moves, then she would have to throw punches that he couldn't handle. At the same time, the guy was surprised that she was really going to rush forward so recklessly and approach him, despite the obvious advantage he held in this fight. The girl resolutely rushed into the attack, counting on a series of powerful blows capable of breaking through the opponent's defense. She believed that if he could read the movements, then she needed to act in such a way that even he could not react. However, the guy, analyzing the situation, understood. Although he could read the flow of magical energy and predict her movements, without the appropriate level of swordsmanship, it was meaningless. He knew that simply exchanging blows with such an opponent would be useless. The guy decided that I already understood enough what Luca was capable of as a swordswoman. He charged forward, clutching his sword in his hand as if he was about to deliver the finishing blow. In response, Luca also rushed forward, shouting a battle cry. She realized that the distance between them was closing, and she mentally noted that there was only one step left before that how they will meet in a decisive clash. Luca, gathering all her strength, suddenly activated her magic technique. Magic circles began to glow around her, and chains began to rise from the ground, sparkling with energy. Her eyes were glowing with determination, and her body tensed up in a fighting stance. The girl found herself immobilized. Chains burst from the ground, tightly wrapped around her arms and legs, preventing her from moving. She stood in a tense stance, clutching her sword, but the magical shackles clearly suppressed her strength. A mixture of anger and surprise appeared on the girl's face, and, clenching her teeth, she exclaimed that these were the fetters, a spell she recognized and clearly didn't expect to encounter in this fight. The teacher, with a cold expression on his face, noted that the girl was a quick learner and explained that the spell he used was also used to restrict the movement of monsters. Luca, who was bound by chains, was shocked. She could not believe that her opponent was able to use taming magic in the middle of a fight. It seemed unbelievable to her, and she could hardly contain her rage and confusion, realizing how strong her opponent was. The girl admitted her defeat. The guy noted that she honestly accepted the outcome of the battle. The same. Holding back her emotions, she explained that her loss was simply a consequence of a gap in their education. He smiled and admitted that she was right. The girl asked the teacher in bewilderment how he managed to read her movements. He replied that he saw a flow of magical energy which surprised her. The guy explained that magical energy and the human body are always in close connection, even without the use of enhancing magic. According to him, thanks to this energy, a person receives additional protection and better control over movements. He noted that when the body moves, one can notice the wave-like movements of magical energy. and it is because of this that he is able to predict the girl's movements. He added that those who use more magic also receive more outstanding physical abilities. The girl was shocked. She considered what was happening impossible. She was perplexed as to how this could happen, since she was sure that it was impossible to use magic in a sword fight. He also added that her belief in the impossibility of using magic was the decisive mistake. The teacher noted that she had underestimated him from the very beginning, and in this, in his opinion, lay the reason for her defeat. The girl was stunned and could not object. The teacher acknowledged that she had drawn logical conclusions based on information she had received through intermediaries, particularly from the knightly orders. He noted that the girl probably tried to keep her cool, but eventually gave in to anger and lost her composure, which played into his hands. However, according to him, this was precisely her mistake. At the moment when she found herself in the least advantageous position, her defeat became inevitable. At this time, the girl thought to herself that she had not intended to boast of her successes, but still admitted that she had indeed underestimated the abilities of her opponent. The guy said that they could consider what was happening a real fight, because it is in battle that a knight shows his true value. He emphasized that this is the essence of their confrontation. The hero told the girl that he saw no point in a person with such potential as she dying senselessly without realizing her capabilities. The girl, hearing this, could hardly contain her emotions and asked if he really thought so. He confirmed it, adding that there is no value in the death of a knight, because it is much more important to realize oneself fully and achieve results in battle. At the same time, he admitted that there are exceptions when a person dies having fully used up his powers, and then such a death commands respect. Luca thought that if the situation was not what the interlocutor was talking about, then it was more important for her to save her life, even if it would look unworthy. She believed that staying alive was of great value. The guy reproached her for being overly indulgent for her father's sake, claiming that the death of a knight is an honor. At this point, an explanation is heard that in childhood, the girl lost her father, the head of the house, who died on the battlefield, which may have influenced her views. After Reuben's death, he was accused of disobeying orders and making mistakes, which led to the disgrace and downfall of the House of Rivet. Luca believed that it was her duty to restore the honor of the House of Rivet, since her older brother failed to become a knight, so she desperately sought to become the best at it. The boy said that the death of Luca's father was the fault of the High Command, not Reuben's himself, since he did not do the impossible. He also noted that the accusation against Reuben's was due to manipulation by the House of Lords. Luca was outraged that the former knight would allow himself such statements, but he replied that perhaps this was the reason he was no longer a knight. It was said that the leaders of the knightly order tried to hide their guilt for the failure, so the responsibility was placed on Reuben's. The House of Lords rewrote the reports and distorted history to protect the guilty and avoid consequences. Kate. Having witnessed the events, he began to guess the true nature of what had happened. The girl wondered in surprise whether he had really understood what was hidden behind this situation. Keith explained that the girl's father lost the battle not because of mistakes, but because he was not given enough information to make the right decisions. He added that he was accused after his death, when he was unable to defend himself. The girl responded by thinking that she could not consider such a death worthy. The girl exclaimed that the interlocutor knew nothing about her father. She assured that he was a wonderful person and did not give up even in a hopeless situation, trying to save as many people as possible. According to her, her father's death was not in vain. On the contrary, he was able to save some knights, and was certainly not the cause of their death. Luke, holding back tears, looked into the eyes of the young man, full of pain and anger. However, unable to cope with her emotions, she still began to cry. Then, seized by a flash of despair or rage, she drew her sword and rushed forward, ready to attack. The heroine, overcome by strong emotions, clutched the sword in her hand. Her face expressed determination and anger. It was as if she was calling upon an inner strength. A stream of energy swirled around her. The chains cracked and flew apart, and the ground shook beneath her feet. Luca resolutely approached the guy, tears and rage burning in her eyes. The girl approached the guy, barely holding back her emotions. He looked at her and asked ironically if she could forgive him for insulting her father. She responded angrily that yes, it was true that she could not forgive him for this. But at the same time, she had already admitted her defeat and understood that continuing the fight now would be pointless and unworthy. The heroine, looking at her opponent, confidently declared that she would not repeat the same mistake twice, because she was not stupid at all. Then, softening a little, she thanked him and said that it was thanks to him that she still had a chance to become stronger. The teacher was left alone on the training ground and thought about the past fight. He noted to himself that rumors were not worth trusting because the reality turned out to be much more serious. He was especially struck by how his rival was able to free herself from the magic of the binds. He even admitted to himself that at some point he became truly scared. The protagonist walked down the academy corridor, thinking about how, since his appointment as a teacher, his life had been filled with unexpected events that always exceeded his expectations. The name Luca Rivette caught his attention, and he thought about her. Looking at the students, he came to the conclusion that perhaps they set themselves too difficult goals. The protagonist wondered how the student named Luca would do in the academy's internal tournament, especially considering that she would become even stronger by then. This thought aroused his keen interest, and he anticipated that watching her progress would be truly exciting. The protagonist observed the students of Class 1A training hard in preparation for the academy's internal tournament. He noted that the students had shown a high level of motivation in recent days and had become more organized and goal-oriented. He noticed that even during the warm-up, they were trying their best. He thought that before, if the students didn't understand something, they would immediately ask for an explanation. But now they began to solve the problems themselves. The teacher asked Aristella how she was feeling physically. The girl replied that she had been able to control her condition better lately, although she had not yet fully returned to normal. She added that she had already gotten used to the changes. Then, with a slight smile, she demonstrated how she lit a flame on her finger and explained that she could now even use basic fire attribute magic. The teacher noticed that Aristella had already managed to stabilize her magical state. The girl admitted with a slight smile that all this had become possible, thanks to a little training. At the same time, the teacher thought that using fire attribute magic requires a lot of effort, because it is difficult to maintain fire of the same quality and size. In the case of Aristella, in his opinion, she probably continues to make extraordinary efforts to achieve such a result. One of the students noticed that the teacher and Aristella were having some mysterious conversations again. Another girl added that before she knew it, they had become so close. She admitted that she had previously considered Aristella to be in opposition to Teacher Kate. Hearing this, Aristella flushed and exclaimed that they were not close at all, although she admitted that she had indeed been against him before. The teacher and Aristella herself looked awkward, reacting to such remarks. Aristella explained that it was quite logical to ask Teacher K for training, because he was really strong. Another happily noted that it was now much easier to communicate with Aristella compared to how it was before. The other girls also agreed with this, adding that before Aristella seemed stern and difficult to get along with, she was even a little scary. Aristella herself, hearing this, was clearly surprised by such confessions. One of the girls happily admitted that she liked the current Aristella much more. This confession touched Aristella herself. She looked surprised and thoughtful. Meanwhile, Fairy, in a conversation with another girl, commented in surprise at what she had heard, not expecting such words. At this time, the teacher noticed that Lena wanted to say something and turned to her with a question. Lena doubted whether they could really win the Academy's internal tournament. The teacher remarked that this was not like her at all. He asked if she was starting to get nervous about the upcoming event. The other team members reacted differently, with some saying that perhaps they have a chance, but someone expressed uncertainty. Inwardly, the teacher reasoned that the students probably just didn't know how strong their third-year seniors were, and that was why they were starting to feel anxious. One of the students admitted that she began to think about her strengths and asked the teacher how much they were inferior to the third-year students. In response, the teacher noted that it is difficult to evaluate this only through the concept of power, but still, the difference between them is huge. He added that in a real fight, most of the current students would lose almost every fight. At the same time, he emphasized that instead of deceiving yourself, it is better to admit the truth. A lie will not change reality. The teacher shared that he already had experience fighting according to the rules of the Academy's internal tournament, and he believed that the third-year students were in a more advantageous position. He added that if there was any advantage that could be singled out for first years, it would most likely be their numbers. The students were discussing the Academy system. One of them noted that there was no replacement of students in classes at their school. The teacher confirmed this and explained that after expulsion, no new students are added. He was asked how many students are expelled per year, and he answered that the number does not exceed the number of fingers on 2 hands. These are those who realized their weaknesses and left voluntarily. The girls were puzzled at the end whether this was a lot or a little. The students discussed the size of the classes and how it would affect the outcome of the battle. One of them noted that Class 3C had been reduced by 4 students and now had 26 students. The teacher explained that such a difference in size was considered insignificant in a mass battle. At the end, one of the students asked if they could win. The teacher noted that the outcome of the situation depends on the students themselves. Aristella. Thinking over his words, I came to the conclusion that this meant that their abilities were not inferior to the students from Class 3C. He suggested that they end the conversation there. One of the students was surprised and impressed that she heard such words from Teacher Keith. Afterwards, the teacher ordered everyone to gather. Keith noted that the students seemed well motivated. He added that the month of training was coming to an end and it was time to try something new. He announced that from now on, the students would be divided into 3 teams of 10 people and they would have a 3-way fight. The students were a little surprised by this turn of events. One of the students asked the teacher if there was any point in a 3-way fight. The student explained that in his opinion, knights do not really need such experience, because in real battles with demons or in the academy tournaments, opponents are divided into 2 sides. Teacher saying that they were absolutely correct. The teacher explained to the students that being in unusual situations that they had not encountered before can help them better understand what is really important. Some students reacted with surprise, while others wondered if it was worth trying. One of the girls shared with her friend that she had been thinking about this for quite some time. The students noticed that the teacher did not always give answers right away. She suggested that he was deliberately creating conditions in which they had to think for themselves and come to conclusions. The girls also expressed the opinion that perhaps the teacher did not adhere to the truths that they had been taught before. At this time, one of the students asked the teacher how they would be divided into teams this time. The teacher informed the students that this time they would be able to choose their own teams. He added that he was only leaving for 2 minutes and advised them to gather with those they considered suitable to form teams of 10. The students were a little taken aback by the unexpected proposal, and one of them noted that he usually asks clarifying questions in such cases. The students began to form teams as they had been instructed. Some of them were already confidently heading towards each other, discussing their decisions, while others were gesturing to indicate who they wanted to invite. One of the girls noted with a smile that if you team up with people you get along with easily, then everything comes together quite naturally. One of them suggested that their team would hardly have come together if it weren't for Kate's teacher. Another student added that at the beginning of the academy, the only way to get close to someone was through a common background. One of the girls noticed that after they united into one group, they began to spend time together much more often. Another supported her, saying that everything happened somehow naturally. Someone else added that now they even have fun together. At this time, the other students silently observed the situation. One of the students asked Raul what he thought of the other team. Raul replied that, to tell the truth, things were pretty bad. However, he added that no matter what, he must show his best side and strive to win, as this is a family rule. One of the guys tried to calm everyone down, saying that if they took 2nd or 3rd place, it was no big deal. Someone noticed that Aristella is not in the best shape right now. The student explained how 3-way battles usually proceed. One of the teams usually leaves the battle first. He emphasized that the remaining 2 teams enter the battle, and a lot depends on this. He added that if everything happens exactly as he described, then it is logical to strive for the weaker team to remain. Another participant noted that in such a situation, the strong team would most likely be the first target. Everyone else silently agreed with his logic. Aristella voiced a plan he believed that the proposed method of fighting would be the most effective for them. She summed it up by saying that this is their strategy. After this, one of the boys noted with surprise that Aristella had changed and asked if the others agreed with this. The girl he addressed was clearly surprised by such a remark. The student noticed that Aristella had previously seemed honest and followed the rules, but now, in her opinion, she began to act a little meanly. In response, Aristella admitted that she had indeed fought strictly according to the rules before. She explained that this was only possible because she had never lost. After losing first to Master Keith, and then to them, she realized how important it was to act more efficiently in order to win. The girl was surprised to suggest that perhaps they were to blame for Aristella's mean behavior. Aristella responded by quoting her teacher, recalling his words about how it was pointless to explain to a demon who did not understand human language what meanness was. She said these words with a serious expression, trying to accurately convey the teacher's intonation. The other girls laughed, noting that she really managed to portray him very accurately. One of the characters noted that, if we were to talk about it, Aristella had recently begun to resemble her teacher a little. However, he wondered whether he should be happy about such a resemblance, since it might not correspond to her real abilities. Meanwhile, the man watching the action was pondering how the plan aimed at compensating for the team's weaknesses would work. He was curious whether the girls would be able to control the situation if they had to fight 2 or even 3 opponents at once. He also wondered whether this plan would be effective in a real 3-way battle. One of the teachers announced that the teams that had completed their preparations should proceed to the designated place. Hearing this, the students began to gather and move in the indicated direction. A man who was watching what was happening was about to begin the next stage, saying to himself that it was time to get down to business. The teacher gave the command to begin training, shouting that it was time to begin. Hearing his words, the students took up fighting positions. They divided into teams and, taking out their training swords, prepared for battle. 3 teams are formed on the training ground: Aristella, Raul, and Cyan Pidayama. All participants are tensely preparing for the fight, each with a sword in their hands and determination on their faces. In the training arena, the participants stood with their weapons at the ready. Aristella watched the situation silently, expressing caution. One of the participants called out to Raul, as if he wanted a signal to act, but he replied that it was too early. In his opinion, the time to attack had not yet come. His team remained vigilant, waiting for the right moment. Sia was thinking about the strategy of the confrontation. She assumed that Raul's team was the main target of Aristella's team, and that was why Raul's fighters were on high alert. The girl realized that if she carefully watched the movements of Aristella's team, she could strike in time and disrupt their plan. She also noticed that from their side, Aristella's team's forces looked weaker, and perhaps this direction could be used to her advantage. Saya thought with confidence that their team could win this battle. She could feel the determination and strength in her comrades. At the same time, the man watching the fight noted to himself that the fight was starting to take a really interesting turn. Each team, based on their own considerations, began to implement their plan. However, the participants had doubts whether the current state of the opponents really corresponds to their expectations. One of them thought that he did not know how accurate their assumptions about the opponent's actions were. And if these assumptions turned out to be wrong, then how would they be able to implement the planned strategy? One of the team members suddenly gave the order to attack, shouting that it was time to act. In response to this order, his comrades rushed forward, weapons at the ready. Their determination was obvious. Meanwhile, the members of the opposing team noticed this movement. One of the girls silently watched what was happening, and the other, clearly worried, reported that the enemy had begun an attack. During the intense battle, members of both teams met in a duel. One of the fighters, noticing the unexpected actions of the opponents, reacted to what was happening in surprise. The girl with the sword realized that Raul's team had begun to act, which caused her shock. During the fight, Sia noticed that the opponents had advanced significantly. She thought that they were deliberately forcing close combat. One of her comrades realized that in such a situation, one must be especially careful not to accidentally hit one's allies. One of the participants realized that what was happening on the battlefield was the implementation of Raul's team's plan. He realized that, despite their own intentions, they would have to engage in combat with an enemy that had come too close. Meanwhile, Raul himself was surprised that the enemy had guessed his team's plan. The observer reflected on how Raul's team managed to take advantage of the situation and bring the fight to close quarters. He believed that in such clashes, the stronger side would quickly find itself in the minority. He noted that Sia's team had failed to anticipate this turn of events and suggested that, now that hand-to-hand combat had begun, everything would depend on the individual abilities of the fighters. Meanwhile, Siaboya realized that in one-on-one fights, their team was losing. One of the combatants noted with satisfaction that, as expected, his team was stronger in close combat. He believed that they had successfully reduced the number of opponents. However, despite his outward confidence, he began to be tormented by doubts inside. A feeling of injustice arose that he could not fully understand. One participant noted with delight that the number of opponents continues to decrease. His partner suddenly realized that they were now engaged in a three-way fight. At the same time, the other fighter, paying attention to the surroundings, realized that there were too few enemies left for this to seem natural. One of the combatants, looking around, asked worriedly where Aristella had gone. His partner responded with surprise that he had not seen her. While the fighters continued to fight, one of them suddenly noticed something unexpected and exclaimed, recognizing someone. At this time, he was feverishly trying to understand where she could have disappeared to. During the battle, one of the participants watched as Aristella entered the fight. He noted that she was probably not in the best shape right now, but it was still impossible to relax with her. He reasoned that in this situation she would strive to win not as a strong person, but as a weak person with her last strength. In the arena, Aristella fought swiftly and confidently, not giving her opponents a chance. Raoul Boy reflected on Aristella's behavior. He admitted that no tricks could be expected from the former Aristella. However, she was acting differently now. He noticed that she had suddenly become distant, and this surprised him. He did not understand why she had done this, but he decided that he needed to sort out something else first before jumping to conclusions. One of the fighters pondered Aristella's actions. He came to the conclusion that she had deliberately abandoned close combat in order to escape the melee. He understood that attempting to increase the distance in a fight makes a participant visible and vulnerable, and he himself had once quickly become one of the first victims because of this. It was for this reason that he and the others began the fight at close range, in order to immediately impose their rhythm. However, he now noticed with surprise that Aristella had stepped outside the main battle and wondered why she had done so. When Aristella gave the command, all participants immediately responded. At her signal, they activated the magic circles using gestures and concentrating energy in their palms. The next moment, the magical attack was activated. A powerful explosion was heard. A blinding flash illuminated the arena, and the earth shook from the force of the impact. One of the participants, holding a sword in his hand, watched the events warily. His gaze betrayed confusion, because a cloud of smoke enveloped the battlefield. Meanwhile, the girl, seizing the moment, suddenly moved forward, heading for the attack. The battle seemed to be over. Traces of the recent explosion were still in the air, and clouds of smoke were slowly dissipating over the arena. The defeated participants lay on the ground, breathing heavily and looking around. One of them, leaning on his hand, tried to rise. The teacher's voice echoed across the arena, announcing the victory of Aristella's team. Someone nearby joyfully exclaimed that they had succeeded, and the emotions on the participants' faces spoke for themselves. They could not believe that they had won. The teacher turned to a girl named Aristella and asked if she had known from the start that Raoul was going to bring things to close combat. She calmly confirmed that yes, she had assumed so. She then added that she thought about what she would do in Raoul's place and ultimately realized that she didn't have much of a choice. There turned out to be few options. Aristella explained that, given their advantageous position, their team could deal with Raoul's team right away. However, even if they won, they would be too exhausted to fight again. Sia's intentions by pretending to fall into Raoul's trap. They only pretended to fight and led their opponents to the final moment. The teacher noted that although everything looked simple in words, in reality her plan was implemented with exceptional skill. He explained that in a fight it is important to consider not only the strength, but also the psychological state of the participants. Some get confused and cannot remain calm. Aristella managed to organize her team's actions so that everyone performed their role exactly as planned. In the end, her plan was successful. He admitted that the battle itself was not particularly important, but it allowed the participants to show what they were capable of in order to win. He noted that he wanted to see what actions each would take to exploit their strengths, and that was quite interesting to watch. He also added that the fight helped the participants understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. The girl questioned the practical use of such battles in real life, for example, when fighting monsters. The teacher admitted that such a system has its drawbacks. He said that monsters were generally not particularly intelligent, with the exception of some species. However, he emphasized that they were still not simple opponents who would rush in without a plan. The teacher explained that if you show weakness in battle, the monsters will start to pursue and finish off the victim. Therefore, in such situations, the only chance for survival is a swift and decisive attack. One of the students listening to him thought about these words. The hero noted that the enemy, which they will have to face, is extremely cunning and effective, especially when it comes to a real threat to life. To survive in such conditions, it is necessary to have as many strong cards in hand as possible. They came to the conclusion that a successful knight knows how to not only use his strengths in battle, but also to use them in an unconventional way. Such a person will be strong not only against demons, but also in battle with people. She said that by watching her father and his comrades, you begin to understand an important truth. Truly strong people always know how to find a way to win. The guy standing opposite her agreed with her words, noting that this was indeed true. Then the story continued with a mental conclusion that strength is not only manifested in power, but also in the ability to find a way to win in any circumstances. Each of the heroes found themselves deep in their own thoughts. They were thinking about the upcoming event, the Academy Tournament, which was getting closer with each passing day. There was water all around. Fairy reached out to the other students, dreaming of them walking forward, leaving her behind. She woke up suddenly when she heard her name being called. The other students were surprised that she had dozed off. Fairy jumped up from her seat. She was informed that, fortunately, half of the lesson was devoted to independent work. One of the boys happily said that the lesson was already over. The girl looked at them thoughtfully, remembering her dream. She heard the boys discussing their plans for after school, and again imagined herself reaching out to them and diving into the water. The thought that everything should be exactly like this was spinning in her head when the same guy turned to her. He asked cheerfully if she would be joining the practice after school. Fairy was surprised. 2 more students approached them. Fairy refused. The guy did not expect to hear a refusal. The girl thought about training. Aristella noticed her condition and asked if everything was okay. Fairy answered sharply and quickly that everything was fine. Sarika intervened in the conversation, claiming that this was not true. Lina agreed with her. Fairy did not notice how she was surrounded and began to deny everything. Lina said seriously that Fairy was acting strange after the last training session. She was surprised. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Her face darkened. Sarika became worried and expressed support. Fairy only frowned slightly. Suddenly she screamed, insisting that nothing had happened, and ran away, leaving the others in bewilderment. She ran out into the yard, feeling terrible, sat down and considered Sarika's words, feeling anxiety growing in her chest. Then a sound caught her attention. Fairy reflected that under her guidance, she had become stronger than she had been before. She reflected on how her fighting skills had improved greatly, and how she was getting along better with the other students. But, despite the victories and the joy of achievements, one alarming but continued to ring in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the thought of what she was capable of, standing just behind her comrades. Fairy reasoned she did not have the same abilities as the others. Almost in a whisper, she admitted to herself that she wanted to become stronger, tormented by these thoughts. Aristella was watching her nearby. Fairy was still hesitant to return to class when someone called out to her. Suddenly, Aristella appeared in front of her, holding out a bento box. Offering her something to eat, they sat down together. Having started a conversation about something insignificant, both soon fell silent and continued their dinner in silence. Fairy asked hesitantly about the choker, which she had noticed Aristella had only recently started wearing. Assuming it was just a hobby or something, she was surprised when Aristella couldn't help but chuckle. She said that another person had the same hobby, adding that he had very questionable taste. Somewhere far away, Professor Keith suddenly sneezed. Aristella explained that she couldn't name the reason, but that she felt weak every time she put on the choker. Fairy could hardly believe it, but Aristella only calmly objected. Fairy wondered if the other girl thought she was weaker than her. She was about to say something, but was interrupted. The white-haired student added that even if her abilities are limited, she sees no point in being pessimistic. Fairy looked up at her in surprise, and she continued without stopping. She explained that by starting something, even a little, you can move forward. Fairy countered, certain that she was simply saying this because she did not feel weak. Aristella looked at her with obvious surprise. With a sad expression on her face, Fairy added that even despite efforts, it is not always possible to achieve what you want. She sighed, admitting that this was what it felt like to truly feel weak. Aristella admitted that she felt like a burden to the class at the time. She longed for her abilities to develop at an acceptable rate. Feeling as if she was walking in complete darkness along a narrow road, Aristella told Fairy about her experiences. She contradicted herself, saying that she had nevertheless found the path that she could follow and achieve success, even while remaining weak. Aristella asked Fairy if she understood that not only they themselves, but others had to realize this. Fairy frowned and agreed. Fairy recalled moments during training battles when their weak team was still able to win. She lowered her head and thought about how by changing her fighting style, she could be useful. Without looking at her friend, Fairy asked her what power was then. Aristella did not answer directly, but rather asked the question herself. Can one consider oneself weak or strong, possessing certain abilities? Fairy listened in surprise as she mused on whether one could consider oneself strong simply by being useful. She admitted that that was the impression she had. Her idea of strength turned out to be completely different. After all, if Fairy considers her strong, then for Aristella herself, she still remains weak. Turning to her friend, Aristella said that if it weren't for Teacher Keith, she would never have realized that she was actually weak. It was surprising that it was the teacher who first pointed out their weaknesses and showed them the way. Aristella asked her if she was the one who asked Keith for extra training. She nodded. After all, that was the reason everyone started training after school. Aristella raised her hand and declared that by recognizing their weaknesses, they were all moving together to become strong. Turning back to Fairy, she asked if they should ask the teacher for advice. Fairy apologized, but her friend immediately objected, reminding her that Sarika and Lena were genuinely worried. Hearing the bell, Aristella was about to leave, when suddenly Fairy called her. Looking at her with gratitude, Fairy shouted with confidence that she would definitely become strong. After a pause, her friend smiled. As she was leaving, Aristella happily said that if Fairy didn't hurry, he risked being left behind. Fairy quietly entered the teacher's office. Sarika and Lena were always with her. He still asked, noticing her serious look. She was surprised that he had guessed. Fairy slumped, looking down. The teacher said that if she had anything to say, he would listen. She objected indignantly that she had no complaints. On the contrary, thanks to him, she had at least some confidence. She admitted that she thought she would be of no use. Professor Keith asked her why she thought that if they had won. She again replied that it was because of Aristella's plan. Continuing to write, he replied that he could understand her doubts, but she had made progress. However, she also added that while others had improved, she was still the weakest in the class. Fairy recalled how he told them to think about their own strengths and weaknesses, as well as the weaknesses of their opponents. Professor Keith considered her words, thinking that she had made a lot of progress recently. Continuing her speech, she mentioned that Aristella suggested using Plan B in case of hand-to-hand combat. Clenching her fingers in the fabric of her skirt, she couldn't stop saying that she should be exchanged right away, otherwise she would drag everyone to the bottom. Unimpressed, the teacher agreed. He said he had done his own research, wondering how she had gotten into the academy in the first place. Fairy couldn't stand his harshness. Professor Keith continued to voice his thoughts, explaining his claims. Speaking harshly about her mastery of attribute magic, he noted that she did not meet the requirements of the selection criteria. Fairy was surprised. She wondered if her entrance exam results were wrong, but she was told no. After all, it wasn't fencing or anything else, so she must have proven herself in something else. Fairy didn't remember anything like that. The teacher said that part of the entrance exam is assessed by the academy itself. She couldn't believe what she heard because the professor had clarified that in her home village, she was considered a child prodigy. She was so embarrassed that she couldn't believe it, thinking that the residents had no idea about it. He didn't deny her words. He was attracted by something else. After a collapse in the mine, about 10 people were at death's door. She was able to save them with the help of magic. There was a mine collapse in the mountainous area where the village was located. They managed to pull out the miners, but they were in serious condition. The victims were saved by little Fairy, who at that age possessed healing magic. She wanted to explain that she was the only one who could have such an ability. The teacher immediately interrupted her, adding that a person cannot use healing magic for a long time. He asked her directly, why could only she do this? The teacher replied that she had an extraordinary amount of magical energy. Fairy couldn't believe it. But the teacher continued without stopping. She was the weakest in the class, but in terms of energy, she was among the first. The professor stated that she would be able to control attributes on the level of Aristella, and it would not be limited to just water control. He still firmly stated that her ability was what all the magicians in the world wanted, and it had always been with her. Getting up from the sofa, she asked why she remained weak then. The professor explained the reason to her. Professor Keith was thinking out loud that she would push the limits someday, and that was already beyond his expectations. She did ask him why he hadn't shared it earlier if he knew. She was told sternly that it was a priority issue. As he stood up, he said that now there would be a bit of rough treatment, but he had no doubt that she would stand it. Fairy did not understand what he wanted to do. The teacher put her on a special training regimen, slightly doubting it. She shouted indignantly at him for seeming unsure about this. She didn't understand where they were going. She was scared, and yet, as she walked towards the exit of the office, she firmly decided to become stronger. They stood in the clearing because the training ground was occupied. Exhaling, the teacher explained that there were many places in the Royal Academy that she had not yet visited. If she had time, she could conduct interesting research. Holding the sword in her hands, she wondered, "This is not a playground, and there is a possibility of getting injured. That is why there will be no activities that pose a threat." She was happy about it, but her hopes were dashed by the teacher's words. She hoped that it wouldn't be a hard training. When the training began, the professor asked her to look him in the eyes. She did not expect this. They stood next to each other, looking into each other's eyes. Standing seriously, the teacher began to act, reaching out his hand towards her. Up close, before her eyes, the man activated magic. She saw something. A scene of battle and destruction appeared before my eyes. People were fighting with demons. Amidst these battles, Fairy stood in uniform with a sword. Her eyes widened. Before her eyes appeared a picture of destruction, screams, and battle. One of the knights ordered a retreat because the monsters were advancing. The other knights did not want to leave, deciding to give the other troops time to retreat. Fairy was determined to fight, as one of the knights noticed. He ordered her to run away, because she would be more useful reporting this to headquarters than on the battlefield. Not taking no for an answer, he turned around. The battle would soon begin, and then it would be too late to retreat. She stared at them in shock, not daring to take a step. But there was no time to think. With difficulty, not hiding her tears, she turned around before starting to run. Fairy couldn't understand why she was the one destined to survive. She found it difficult to accept this, and was tormented by thoughts that she was incapable of anything. Running in the opposite direction, she reflected that it wouldn't have made much difference even if she had stayed. The very thought that she was weak, that she could not die with her comrades, made her sick. As she continued to run, she blamed herself for her weakness, for not being strong enough to die with her comrades. Without realizing it, the girl fell as blood ran down her face, blinding her eyes. Monsters were approaching from behind. A crowd of demons was heading towards her, and she stared at them in shock. Rising from the ground, Fairy pulled her sword from its sheath, since there were no comrades nearby to protect her. She wasn't sure she could defeat them alone, but she still decided to fight to the death. Having attacked the enemies, Fairy began to chop down the monsters that came under her hand. Ignoring the blood that had been spilled, she realized that she could fight. But it was too late. She felt sorry that she could not save others, and she said goodbye to them in her thoughts, asking for forgiveness. But this did not stop her from furiously continuing the fight, dealing a precise blow to the last remaining monster. When it was all over, she noticed something. Darkness began to consume her. Before her eyes lay the teacher sprawled on the grass. She turned him over on his back in alarm, wondering what had happened. Fairy noticed that her hands were bloody and chafed. She couldn't believe that she had been able to defeat such a man. Without distraction, she began to use healing magic, deciding to focus on that. Frowning, she realized she needed to use stronger magic. During the treatment, she remembered something. In the memoirs, the teacher explained to the students the basics of healing magic, comparing it to strengthening magic. Fairy listened thoughtfully then, that when using this magic it is necessary to carefully examine the condition of the wounded person. Touching his hands, she continued the treatment, noticing how the pulse gradually weakened. Fairy couldn't believe it. She started calling for the teacher, unable to hold back her tears. She screamed, refusing to accept reality, leaning over him. Unable to bear the pain, her eyes clouded over. Losing consciousness, she collapsed on the professor. Barely opening her eyes, she saw the infirmary. She remembered what happened recently. It was a training session with a teacher. Jumping up from her seat, she called the teacher. Opening the screen, a healthy professor entered. The professor asked her if she understood what had happened. She, of course, did not. His explanation was that it was all just an illusion, magic designed to reveal her deepest fears. Fairy asked him again in shock. He replied that, of course, such magic existed. With a shudder, she realized that Professor Keith was creepy. In addition, from Selena, this type of magic was considered impractical. And yet she couldn't help but wonder, what was all this for? He answered that mana is connected to the psyche. The professor used this magic so that in moments of strong emotion, she could release more mana than usual. Fairy asked him if she really had to go through all that to increase her mana. He remained silent. She wondered if there was another way to do this. Wondering whether it was necessary to show her this, the professor explained that it was not his choice. He added with a chuckle that he didn't expect her to worry about accidentally killing him. Fairy explained that it was because they were in a clearing. Her teacher interrupted her. She was still scolding herself for not being able to save him. What he said next boiled down to one thing. All her fears came from a feeling of powerlessness. His words were spinning in her head. Despite this, the professor continued that she was afraid, and fear was paralyzing her, holding her back. Fairy pouted and countered that he said she had to face the truth. He wasn't denying it, but he wasn't saying she had to give up on her goals or dreams. He smiled and said that even if the steps were small, they would still lead to strength. She agreed, but objected that she was different from others. She doesn't compare herself to Aristella, but even compared to her, Sarika and Lina make great strides, thanks to her guidance. She understands that she is simply being left behind. Remembering this, she looked with bitterness. His words have stuck in her head ever since, about the number of people who give up and drop out of school. Fairy wondered if she would become one of them, feeling inadequate and powerless. She entered the academy not because she wanted to, but because of the expectations of her fellow villagers, who hoped that she would become a knight. After all, knights are well paid. However, waving her hands, she explained that it was not that she was forced to do it. She was simply overexcited because she had been called gifted, having happily reported that thanks to the professor she had shown herself well in the trial fights. She still felt that something was missing. She realized that she was not the only one who had the opportunity to learn from him. Both she and the others in the class improved their abilities, so much so that the girl could not catch up with them. This made her think, maybe all this is not for her. The professor listened silently. The man asked her if she still believed she had no talent. He reminded her that she had a mana reserve that many dreamed of. The girl wanted to object, but she couldn't. The professor asked how much time had passed since she began learning to use a sword. The answer was not even a year had passed. The man considered it obvious, although the student did not understand what he was getting at. He did explain, however. Others have been doing this since childhood, setting their goals from a young age. Continuing, he mentioned that Fairy grew up in the countryside, knowing almost nothing about knights. And yet, she managed to get into a prestigious academy. The only thing she lacked compared to others was the time spent on training. If she only recently began to aspire to knighthood, then it is quite clear that she is not yet as skilled as the others. From their point of view, it must be scary to try to catch up with others with so little experience. He added that he wasn't saying it to make her feel better. She was trying to process his words. Delighted, she spoke up. Is she really amazing? The professor thought about how simple she was. The teacher agreed with her. The girl did not believe it. He could say whatever he wanted, but it was important that she believed it herself. Still, he wondered if she felt the effect of the special training. He did explain that she was fighting off monsters and trying to heal him. If she hadn't been able to, she wouldn't have seen it. Just as she used magic and defeated a group of monsters, it meant that she could do the same in reality. She decided to test it and activated the ability, and was very surprised. The professor firmly stated that she was a special case. She did not expect this. She asked again, not believing it. He repeated his words indifferently. Fairy smiled happily. It was time for her to go, and the professor advised her not to overdo it. The girl happily left the medical center. The doctor came up to him and asked if she had heard everything. Akris confirmed it. It came as a surprise to her that he did quite well, especially considering how he ran out carrying a student in his arms. The doctor asked him if he had actually used a mental interference spell on her. Didn't he say that it shouldn't be used unless absolutely necessary? Because one mistake could lead to injury? He agreed, but added that in this case it was necessary. The point of this training was to evoke strong emotions, because she was always too relaxed. Otherwise, the method would not work. However, using a mind-affecting illusion to evoke strong emotions was too risky. Besides, if she used up most of her mana, it would be physically dangerous. He didn't deny that. He replied that Fairy had a lot of mana, so it wasn't a problem. Akris crossed her arms, believing him. The professor sensed accusation in her tone, and yet there was something else. He pointed out that it seemed she still hadn't forgiven him for that spell. She exclaimed indignantly that now she understood why she couldn't stand him. The doctor said Fairy was a nice girl. He countered that she just liked getting into trouble. Keith didn't understand why she said that. Akris asked a question. If a girl becomes a knight, will she be sent to the front lines? Professor Keith explained her situation. The young woman admitted that she wished innocent people like Fairy would stay away from the front lines. Fairy had to decide that for herself, he added. It wasn't up to them to decide what would make her happy. Turning around, she happily said that he would never change. He agreed with her with a smile. I guess that will never happen. Kate helps people by giving them a boost in their development, but she wanted to make sure of it. She wanted to check with him if it was his idea to put Fairy through all this. The professor wasn't worried about it. Akris asked if he always allowed decisions to be made individually. The professor did not deny it. The young woman admitted that she does not regret her decision to stay away from the front lines because she made this choice herself. They met eyes and the man objected that it was a lie, because if she really made that choice, it doesn't mean she doesn't regret it. Akris didn't understand his words. He seemed to have asked a question he had already confirmed. The doctor mentioned that he should learn tactics, because if that were true, trying to hide your feelings wouldn't help anyone. He wanted to explain that even if she ended up on the front lines, death was inevitable. She understood that, but it didn't change anything. Working in a safe place while others risked their lives, she couldn't help but feel guilty. Keith couldn't deny it, because his students would have to face dangerous situations, and all he could do was prepare them for it. He spoke quite harshly when he said that some would most likely not live to see their retirement. The man looked thoughtfully at the floor, then apologized for his nonsense. She was surprised that it actually bothered him. Even though he was called the strongest sage, he was only one and could not be everywhere at once. The professor looked thoughtfully at his palm, because it was because of this that he could not save those he wanted to. Akris asked if he had given up on the idea of saving all of humanity, and then she clarified her question. It was about researching magical equipment. This opened up many possibilities for the knight, whose magic had no effect on the monsters. Precautions are taken for such cases, but nothing is perfect. If he completed his research, he could save many knights' lives, but it was not ready yet. Professor Keith grimly opined that the whole premise was probably wrong, meaning they would have to start from scratch. If the study went nowhere, it would be little different from other similar attempts. People were fighting on the front lines, saving lives, and he was wasting time on possibly useless research. It made him sick. He grimly admitted that he was a pathetic person. Akris couldn't stand to see this and extended her hand. Covering his eyes with her palm, she began to stroke his head. Keith didn't immediately understand the nurse's actions, but he understood that she was trying to calm him down. Akris admitted that she used to feel depressed, but over time she got used to it. Still holding him, she said that she believed in him and was sure that he could save humanity. The man indifferently noted that she was placing too much trust in him. The nurse understood this, so she could only slightly encourage him at such moments. Akris continued speaking. After all, he always did an excellent job, and the trust of the students only confirms his strength. Fairy looked into the infirmary, looking for a hair tie. But what she saw in front of her was a completely different picture. An awkward silence hung between them. Embarrassed, Fairy apologized and immediately left the medical center. Akris froze, not knowing what to do, and began to shake the man. His answer was his indifferent truth. She nodded but exclaimed that from the outside everything looked completely different. Meanwhile, Fairy ran to the yard, still blushing. Sitting down on a bench, she thought about what she had seen. She hadn't expected it at all. At that moment, someone called her name. When she saw the professor, Fairy began to swear that she hadn't seen anything. But that wasn't why he had come. Surprised, she immediately admitted that she had not known about his relationship with the nurse. It was a misunderstanding. In fact, he came at Akris's request to clear up this misunderstanding, and also to add that they do not have any relationship. Fairy did not really believe it. Immediately, waving her hands indignantly, she objected that this did not explain anything, because she saw what they were doing. The professor had one idea, to erase her memory. He snorted and said it was just a joke. Fairy was indignant that he shouldn't say that in a serious tone. The girl thought about his behavior, not surprised that he could actually erase the memory, and even imagined it. Still, she wondered, since they were not in a relationship, why was the nurse hugging him? The answer was that they had known each other since childhood. The professor explained that he wanted her to act more mature, but she remained the same as in the past. Fairy asked him again, not believing that they had been friends since childhood. The teacher only nodded. A monologue about how they met flashed through the teacher's mind, but out loud he answered briefly. It was because of this that he had no compunctions about sending her to the infirmary so often. Fairy was shocked by his cruelty. Fairy decided to clarify. From his point of view, Akris supported him precisely as an old friend. He confirmed it. One did not lie, the other believed in his truth. The professor admitted that the nurse didn't want rumors to spread, and that's why he was there. Everything became clear to her, and he did not demand silence from her, leaving it to her discretion. She couldn't believe that he wasn't going to stop her. In her thoughts, she wondered how she could use this. However, she did not want to cause problems for Miss Akris, so she decided to be careful. The professor could not believe it. If it were for his sake, she would not care. After that, he handed her a hair tie. After finishing the conversation, he stood up and advised her to be careful on the way home. She tied her hair in a ponytail at the side. Reflecting on what she had seen, she believed that her first impression had been correct. With a blush of embarrassment, she pictured Professor Keith and Miss Akris together and quickly pushed the thoughts away. There were students on the training field who needed to leave because it was already getting dark. The other guys asked Raoul and Ymir not to overdo it. The guys stood in front of each other, holding their swords tensely. A few days before, Professor Keith had given a letter to Raoul. Raoul asked an unexpected question, but even the teacher was not insensitive enough to invade the privacy of his students. To Ymir, that he had a spell that allowed him to read letters through the envelope. The man did not say that he could. The student asked if the professor had heard anything, and he was told no. After looking at them, he wished them a good day, and then left. Professor Keith thanked another teacher for taking on his students' extracurricular practice. It was teacher Mylene. Balak was pleased that the young teachers were enthusiastic about teaching. Mylene responded that, thanks to teacher Keith, her students were motivated. Balak was pleased to report that this time the first years were showing great potential. The young teacher asked if more students were coming for extracurricular activities, and they were. He suggested that if there were 2 classes, they could have a mock fight. The former commander couldn't believe it, exclaiming only that this was the younger generation. As the older generation, he could learn from them. Malin reported that the students of Keith, Raoul, and Ymir were engaged in an intense sword fight. After she said it was time to end, the 2 students continued to fight. She approved of this motivation, but was concerned that they would not overdo it. The teacher advised him to talk to them. Keith thanked her. There were training fights between students. Lina and Sarika were talking about Raoul and Ymir fighting against Bellamy and Graham, with Aristella standing next to them. They discussed their teammates' skills, obviously believing that Raoul's team was the stronger. But Bellamy and Graham were applying the pressure. Aristella commented that Raoul was not fighting so well today, which was unusual for him. Lena wondered if it could be because he was going to challenge himself. Sarika didn't know the answer. Aristella rather assumed so. She reported that he seemed to have hit some kind of barrier. The opponents were facing each other. Graham told his partner to keep the pressure on, advancing on Raoul. Raoul thought about the actions of his opponents and their attacks, not thinking that he could cope. He was analyzing how to proceed, deciding not to rely on theory, and not to leave any open places. Ymir wanted to express his plan when Raoul began to act. The guy was advancing on Graham. They clashed swords. Graham blocked Raoul's attack. The enemy jumped back, starting to grin. Raoul did not understand his actions. How Graham immediately used magic. Bellamy suddenly attacked his opponent. Ymir watched tensely. Suddenly, Raoul began to fall. His comrade caught him. Holding the boy in his arms, Graham happily announced that they had won. The other students continued training. They thought about the fight and how it went. Ymir suddenly said that it was not like Raoul. He exhaled and replied that he was taken by surprise, that's all. He lowered his eyes in disappointment and said that he had lost anyway. Ymir stood up abruptly and suggested that they fight one-on-one. They fought each other intensely. The 2 boys, watching, discussed their comrades. Raoul was losing the fight. The other couldn't stand it, screaming. Ymir went on the offensive. The boy frowned, gritting his teeth. He held the sword tightly. In the past, they both studied under the same teacher. Ymir's swordsmanship was similar, but their approach to combat was different. At that time, their teacher had retired, but his strength was still terrifying. Raoul's strengths were Ymir's weaknesses, and vice versa. For better or for worse, their styles complemented each other perfectly, and the result. After all, any of them could have won this match. They made a series of sword attacks. Raoul thought that he couldn't find an opening, so he needed to create distance. Suddenly, his opponent appeared in front of Raoul, and with his sword he threw his weapon away. Raoul, not expecting this, fell. Ymir confidently stated that he didn't even have a chance against him, and then extended his hand. Sitting, Ymir asked about the letter. He guessed that it was from his friend's father. As his old friend, he knew that when he couldn't concentrate on training, it was because of his father. Raoul asked if his friend knew what was written. He was told no. Ymir said he didn't have the X-ray vision to see such things unless he told him. As Graham immediately appeared in front of him, hearing the word problems, Graham clapped, indicating that he was willing to provide emotional support. He admitted that Raoul had been feeling a bit down since that moment, and so he wanted to help. So he said he would listen to the first patient, Raoul. He was surprised. He had nothing to say, but Ymir smirked and pushed him to speak. Graham would have been glad if the conversation had turned to love. Raoul wanted to kill Ymir. The guy asked what was bothering him. Raoul had to say that he had received a letter from his father, and judging by what was written, the boy admitted that the letter said that he was not living up to his father's expectations. Graham agreed, but then immediately objected, not believing his words. Raoul said with a smile that he was always told to strive for the top, but now his father was not at all happy with the results. Graham was surprised that the other had a strict father. But Raoul understood his father's position. They had to maintain their rank. Just because he came in second place in the entrance exam didn't mean he was still in second place. His friend questioned him. He may have excelled in everything, but in terms of actual skill, he was the same as Ymir. Graham couldn't tell which one was better. In any case, after learning about the entrance exams, his father wanted him to take first place in the semester finals. Graham asked again in shock. He couldn't believe it. After all, there is nothing that education would not give. But, as was said, he had some doubts. He had doubts that he could not concentrate on his studies. His team's strategy in that match was perfectly in line with what they had been taught. They fought in close combat, not allowing any tactics to be used, and that was the best option. After all, who came out on top in the end was Aristella's team. They lost because they couldn't figure out their strategy. Graham admitted that it was an unusual strategy, because they pretended to give in to their plan, but something else happened. He didn't quite understand it correctly. Aristella had devised this strategy, and they had to consider all options, no matter how unlikely they seemed. His friend objected that this was unreasonable. He explained that he had lost to him only because his brain was overloaded. Raoul wanted to object, but he couldn't. Others agreed that it was very unlike him, harshly criticizing him. They couldn't win based on theory alone. Graham read a lot of battle journals and thought about it almost every time. They had textbooks that contained the answers, but if they were applied in combat, he didn't think it would yield much results. That's why they needed people like Raoul who could analyze and give instructions. His advice was to stop running in circles. Getting up from the steps, he said that even if the goal is as high as a mountain, there are always different ways to climb it. So he suggested choosing the most suitable route he could find. Raoul looked at him in surprise. The boy laughed so much that his friend doubted his words. Raoul simply admired his innocence. Graham thought it was sarcasm, but he was told it was a sincere compliment. They began to talk, and Ymir smiled at this. Raoul suggested organizing joint classes when he was called. Ymir held out his sword, offering another fight, as he had been resting for a long time. Raoul said with confidence that he would not lose this time. Professor Keith appears and says there was nothing to worry about. Agris asks if they found the problem, and Keith replies that it was nothing serious. Keith adds that if they can solve everything themselves, there is no point in interfering. Agris believes they can trust the students to overcome some of their own obstacles. The professor added that if they couldn't do that, they shouldn't try to win the annual tournament, despite his high expectations. The man emphasizes that everything depends on the students themselves, regardless of his expectations. Keith muses that if they could always do the right thing, they would have destroyed the monsters by now. Thinking about it, even if you try to do the right thing, you can still fail. Reality does not forgive mistakes, even if the goals are as big as a mountain. Graham was saying that there are always different ways to climb a mountain, so you need to choose the easiest route you can find. No matter how thorny and steep this route may be, if you keep going, it eventually reaches the top. The fighting on the training ground was still going on. She was amazed that the number of Class 1A students attending extracurricular activities was increasing daily. Akris expected students their age to be more reckless. The young woman asked if he made them come every day. The answer was that he never made them. It just showed how much they wanted to win the tournament. Akris was impressed, but he also added that it all started with just 3. All this was thanks to the worst trio. 3 girls approached them, one of whom asked them not to be rude. The professor asked them if they were taking a break. They agreed with him. Lina asked him if he always watched them train. Akris admitted that this was true, because he stayed until evening every day to watch them. The man did not deny it. The professor reflected on how students sometimes missed curfew, causing the dorm staff to complain about him. Not to mention Akris. The teacher also mentioned that he had been taking up her time too often, but Akris countered that it was okay. Sarika also mentioned that she prefers having teacher Malin here. Very happily informed him that, unlike him, she was concerned about their physical well-being. Sarika agreed. Suddenly, Akris asked him if it was true that he had a personal duel with Luca Rivet. Teacher Keith replied that she was just a student, but she understood well how battles actually worked. Now he understood why others praised her.